shift in the power dynamic. When you stop giving your emotional energy to the narcissist, you reclaim it for yourself. You break the cycle of manipulation and emotional dependency. You remove the fuel that keeps their sense of control burning. But indifference is not an easy state to achieve. It requires more than simply ignoring the narcissist. It requires a fundamental change in how you perceive them and, more importantly, how you perceive yourself. Because the reason they were able to control you in the first place is that at some level you allowed their opinion of you to matter. You internalized their judgments, their criticisms, their projections. And so their words cut deep, not because they were true, but because you believed at some level that they might become truly indifferent. You must confront that vulnerability. You must ask yourself, why did their opinion hold so much weight? What part of me was willing to believe that I deserved this treatment? These are not comfortable questions, but they are necessary because the path of indifference lies through self-no-worth. When you know who you are, when you define your worth independently of the narcissist opinion, there is nothing they can say or do to destabilize you. Their insults become meaningless. Their manipulations fall flat. Their attempts to provoke you are nothing but silence. And make no mistake, your indifference will provoke a reaction. Narcissists cannot tolerate being ignored. It is an existential threat to them. When you stop reacting, they will escalate their efforts to regain control. They may resort to guilt, to rage, to pity. They may try to smear your name, spread lies, or enlist others to pressure you into re-engagement. These are not signs that you're doing something wrong. They are signs that you're doing everything right. Because the narcissist's panic in the face of your indifference reveals the truth. Their power was never real. It only existed because you gave it to them. And the moment you stop giving it, it evaporates. It's worth noting that indifference is not the same as apathy. Apathy is a form of emotional deadness, shutting down of feeling. Indifference, in the way I'm describing it, is an active and conscious choice. It's not that you become numb or cynical. It's that you decide their opinions no longer have a place in your emotional world. You maintain your values, your integrity, your capacity for love, but you withhold those things from people who are incapable of respecting them. This is not coldness. It is self-respect in its most powerful form. There's something else, something even more profound. When you cultivate indifference to the narcissist's attempts to control you, you are not just freeing yourself from their grip. You are reclaiming your inner peace. You no longer live in a state of hypervigilance, constantly anticipating their next move. You no longer waste your energy trying to appease someone who cannot be satisfied. You no longer carry the emotional burden of their dysfunction. In short, you get your life back. And that is a victory they cannot touch. So how do you begin to cultivate this indifference? It starts with recognizing that you do not owe the narcissist anything. Not your attention, not your emotional labor, not your validation. You have the right to walk away without explanation. You have the right to protect your peace. And every time you refuse to engage with their provocations, you reinforce that right. It's a practice, a discipline. But with time, it becomes second nature. And here's the truth that narcissists cannot stand. The more indifferent you become, the less power they have. It doesn't matter how loud they scream, how cruel they become, or how desperately they try to pull you back in. When you refuse to engage, when you meet their chaos with silence, you deny them the one thing they cannot live without, your emotional investment. At the end of the day, the most powerful move you can make against the narcissist is not revenge. It's not proving them wrong. It's not even exposing them for what they are. It's simply this: living your life on your own terms without any regard for their opinion. Because nothing shatters their illusion of power more completely than realizing you don't need them and never did. The final and perhaps most profound way to shatter a narcissist's power over you is by moving forward and building a life of purpose, meaning, and independence, not merely surviving but thriving in a way that renders their influence irrelevant. invest in yourself, when you start living with intention, they lose the ability to control you, because a person anchored in meaning cannot be manipulated by someone else's chaos. You become impervious not through force, but through the sheer weight of your own purpose. But this transformation does not happen by accident. It requires conscious effort. When you leave a narcissist, there is often a void, a psychological and emotional vacuum. They occupied so much mental real estate that their absence can feel disorienting. And if you are not careful, that void can pull you back. The temptation to re-engage, to seek closure, to make them see your worth, it can be overwhelming. But here is a hard truth. No explanation you give, no proof you offer will ever satisfy them. Their inability to value you is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a testament to their dysfunction. And the only way to win is to refuse to play the games. What do you do instead? You fill the void with meaning. You pour your energy into pursuits that reflect your values. Whether it's your career, your relationships, your creativity, or your own personal growth. You take every ounce of energy you once gave to managing their chaos and reinvest it in building a life that is richer and more expansive than they could ever comprehend. In doing so, you shift from being reactive to proactive. You no longer live in response to their manipulations. You live according to your own internal compass, and that shift is everything. It's important to understand that this is not about superficial success. Narcissists themselves are often obsessed with appearances, the illusion of power and status. But what you are building goes deeper. It's about cultivating a life grounded in authenticity, a life where your worth is not contingent on external validation. That kind of life is unshakable. It cannot be dismantled by a smear campaign or a petty attempt to undermine your confidence, because its foundation is internal, not external. And here is the irony. Nothing unsettles a narcissist more than seeing you thrive without them. It dismantles their carefully crafted illusion of superiority. They depend on the belief that you cannot live without their validation. When you prove otherwise, not through words, but through action, you expose that illusion for what it is. It's not about seeking revenge or proving a point. It's about embodying the truth that their power was always a mirage, one that crumbles the moment you refuse to believe in it. There will be moments when this path feels lonely. Leaving a narcissist often means leaving behind an entire ecosystem of relationships, habits, and mental frameworks that were built around them. But that is the price of freedom, and it's a price worth paying, because on the other side of that loss is a life that is fully yours. A life where you are no longer a character in someone else's narrative, but the author of your own. And in this process, you discover something else, something even more valuable. You realize that the person you are becoming would never again tolerate the kind of treatment you endured. The version of you that once felt trapped, confused, and powerless no longer exists. In its place is someone who knows their worth, not because anyone else affirms it, but because you have proven it to yourself through action, through courage, and through the willingness to rebuild your life on your terms. This is the one move that shatters a narcissist's power completely. It's not a dramatic confrontation. It's not a clever retort. It's the quiet, relentless pursuit of a life so full, so meaningful, so completely your own that their absence becomes a footnote, a reminder of how far you've come. Because the greatest revenge is not to destroy them, it's to render them irrelevant. And when you commit to your own growth, when you build a life they cannot touch, you do exactly that. In the end, the real victory lies not in making them feel your pain, but in reaching a place where their pain no longer concerns you. And that freedom, that unshakable, undeniable freedom, is yours for the taking.
That's the sound of someone who's misplaced.
Oh, that was good. That was a good one. Do another one.
The first and most crucial step to breaking free from a narcissist's grip is recognizing that their control is, at its core, an illusion. It feels real, painfully real, when you are entangled in their web, but the truth is that the power they hold over you is not based on objective reality. It's a carefully constructed psychological game. one that relies entirely on your participation. Once you understand how this illusion operates, you gain the ability to dismantle it piece by piece, and that is where freedom begins. Narcissists do not control you through physical force, they do it through perception, by distorting your reality and manipulating your emotions. Their power thrives in the shadows of confusion and self-doubt. They gaslight you, making you question your own memory, intuition, and even your sanity. They exploit your vulnerabilities, using your fears and insecurities against you, and perhaps most dangerously, they position themselves as the center of your emotional world. They create a narrative where your worth depends on their approval, and where their displeasure equals your failure. It's a powerful trap, but only if you believe it. The psychological mechanism behind this is not complicated. Humans are social creatures, hardwired to seek connection and validation from those around us. This is especially true in close relationships. When you invest emotionally in a narcissist, you unknowingly grant them access to your internal sense of value. And once they have that access, they manipulate it. One moment they lift you up with praise and affection, the next they cut you down with criticism and cold indifference. This cycle of reward and punishment is not random, it's deliberate. It keeps you in a state of emotional dependence, always striving to regain their affection and avoid their wrath. But here is the truth that shatters their power. You are not actually trapped. Their control only works if you accept their version of reality. The moment you begin to see through the manipulation, to recognize that their approval does not define your worth, you begin to sever the psychological chains. This realization is not just intellectual, it has to reach down into your emotional core. You must understand deeply that the narcissist's power is a projection. It is not real in the objective world. It exists only because you have allowed it to shape your inner experience. This is why awareness is so transformative. It exposes the illusion for what it is. And once you see the strings being pulled, the spell breaks. You begin to notice how they twist your words to suit their narrative. You see how they bait you into reacting so they can paint you as the problem. You recognize how they systematically erode your confidence, not because you are weak or inadequate, but because their survival depends on keeping you small. With every layer of awareness you uncover, their grip weakens. But awareness alone is not enough. You must also choose to stop playing the game. Narcissists rely on your engagement. They need you to defend yourself, to explain, to seek their understanding. Every time you react, you validate their power. The way out is to disengage from their narrative entirely. This doesn't mean arguing or trying to prove them wrong. It means emotionally stepping back and refusing to accept the role they have assigned to you. When you no longer seek their approval, their disapproval loses its sting. It can feel frightening to take this step because breaking free from a narcissist challenges the entire framework of the relationship. They will resist, they will escalate their tactics, accusations, guilt, and perhaps even love bombing to pull you back in. This is not a sign that you are weak, it is proof that you are becoming stronger and they feel the loss of control. If you stay the course, if you continue to hold to the truth that their power is an illusion, you will reach a point where their attempts to manipulate you no longer work. You will see them not as the towering figure they present themselves to be, but as someone who is, at their core, deeply fragile and insecure. The final step in breaking free is reclaiming your internal authority. This means defining your worth on your own terms. It means trusting your perceptions, even when the narcissist tries to deny them. And it means allowing yourself to let go, not just physically, but emotionally. The narcissist's power can only persist if you carry their voice inside your mind. But when you realize that their voice is not the ultimate truth, you reclaim ownership over your own story. And here's what happens when you fully grasp that their control is an illusion. You become immune to their manipulation. Their words lose their ability to wound. Their judgment no longer determines how you see yourself. And when you no longer feed their need for dominance, they lose the ability to hold you captive. That is real freedom. Not just from the narcissist, but from the false reality they tried to impose on you. The most powerful move you can make is to see through the illusion and refuse to play by their rules. Because once you recognize that the cage was never locked, you realize you were free all along. The second and perhaps most decisive move to break free from a narcissist's grip is to reclaim your emotional independence. This isn't just about creating physical distance, though that can be necessary. It's about disentangling your sense of self from their manipulation. narcissists thrive on emotional enmeshment. They work tirelessly to blur the boundaries between where you end and where they begin. If they can make their feelings your responsibility, if they can make your identity dependent on their validation, then they have you. But the moment you stop allowing them to dictate your emotional world, their hold on you begins to crumble. At the heart of emotional independence is a simple but profound truth. You are responsible for your own feelings, and only your own. This may sound obvious, but when you're caught in a relationship with a narcissist, this truth becomes obscure. Narcissists are masters at shifting blame. If they feel insecure, it's your fault for not reassuring them. If they're angry, it's because you provoked them. If they're distant, it's because you're too needy. Over time, you begin to internalize this pattern. You start walking on eggshells, trying to manage their moods and prevent conflict. And in doing so, you surrender your emotional autonomy. But here's the reality. No one else can control your emotions unless you let them. The narcissist's ability to destabilize you relies entirely on your participation in their game. They provoke and you react. They withhold affection and you chase after it. But the truth is, you are not obligated to play this role. You are not responsible for how they feel, and their opinion of you does not define your worth. The moment you internalize this, you begin to pull back the power they've stolen from you, power that was never truly theirs in the first place. Emotional independence requires a radical shift in perspective. It means recognizing that their manipulative tactics, whether it's guilt-tripping, gaslighting, or love-bombing, are not about you. They are about the narcissist's need to control and maintain superiority. When you see this clearly, their behavior stops feeling personal. You begin to understand that their anger is not a reflection of your failure. Their approval is not a measure of your value, and their attempts to make you feel small are rooted in their own profound insecurity. But recognizing this truth is only the first step. The real challenge is learning to stay grounded in your emotional center, even when the narcissist tries to pull you off balance. This means practicing a kind of mental discipline, a refusal to engage in the emotional chaos they create. It means resisting the impulse to defend yourself against their false accusations. It means refusing to explain yourself when they twist your words. And most importantly, it means learning to sit with your own feelings without needing their validation. Of course, this is easier said than done. Narcissists are skilled at exploiting your emotional triggers. They know your weaknesses because you've shared them in moments of vulnerability, and they will use those vulnerabilities to keep you hooked. If you fear abandonment, they will withdraw affection. If you value kindness, they will accuse you of being selfish. If you pride yourself on being reasonable, they will paint you as irrational. The key to breaking free is recognizing these tactics for what they are, desperate attempts to maintain control, and refusing to let them dictate how you feel about yourself. One practical way to cultivate emotional independence is to develop a kind of internal observer. When the narcissist lashes out, step back mentally and ask yourself, what are they trying to make me feel? What narrative are they pushing? This simple act of observation creates a gap between their behavior and your emotional reaction. It allows you to see their manipulation as a pattern rather than a personal attack. And in that gap, you regain your freedom to choose how you respond. Another powerful tool is boundary setting, not just external boundaries, but emotional ones. You cannot control how the narcissist behaves, but you can control what you accept and how you react. Emotional boundaries sound like this. I am not responsible for their anger. I do not need their approval to know my worth. I will not engage in arguments that twist reality. By holding these boundaries internally, you strip the narcissist of their ability to control your emotional landscape. This process is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about reclaiming the right to feel your own feelings on your own terms. It's about recognizing that you deserve peace of mind, and you do not have to earn it by appeasing someone else. And as you grow stronger in your emotional independence, something remarkable happens. The narcissist's attempts to control you lose their power. Their accusations feel hollow. Their manipulation becomes transparent. And their opinion of you, which once felt like the center of your world, becomes irrelevant. The truth is, a narcissist cannot survive without your emotional investment. They need your reactions, your anxiety, your need for their approval. When you withdraw that investment, when you stop playing the emotional game, they are left with nothing to feed on. And when there is nothing left to control, their power collapses. The most profound act of defiance against a narcissist is to live emotionally free, to feel your own feelings, trust your own reality, and define your own worth. Because when you no longer need their validation to feel whole, you become untouchable. The third essential move to break free from a narcissist's grip is to refuse to engage in their emotional traps. This requires a level of psychological clarity and self-control that can be difficult to maintain, especially when you've been conditioned to react. But it is precisely your reactions that the narcissist feeds on. They thrive on creating emotional chaos and pulling you into it. When you stop engaging, when you no longer allow yourself to be a participant in their manipulative games, you begin to dismantle the very foundation of their control. Narcissists operate through a predictable cycle of emotional manipulation. First, they idealize you, showering you with attention, validation, and promises. This phase feels intoxicating. It makes you believe you've found someone who finally sees you in the way you've always wanted to be seen. But that idealization cannot last because it isn't based on reality. It's based on the narcissist's need to secure control. The moment you show independence or fail to mirror their grandiosity, the devaluation begins. They undermine your confidence with subtle, not so subtle criticisms. They twist your words. They provoke emotional reactions. And they do this because your emotional distress confirms their sense of power. When you react, when you defend yourself, explain yourself, or attempt to reason with them, you are in effect rewarding their behavior. Your emotional response becomes a signal that their manipulation is working. It confirms to them that they still hold influence over your inner world. And this is why refusing to engage is so powerful. It sends the opposite message, that their tactics no longer affect you. But stepping out of these emotional traps requires more than simply ignoring the narcissist. It requires understanding why you are tempted to engage in the first place. For many people trapped in these dynamics, there is a deep-rooted desire to be understood. You want to be seen accurately, especially when the narcissist distorts reality. So you argue. You defend yourself against their false accusation. You try to make them understand your point of view. But here's the hard truth. You cannot win this game, because the narcissist is not playing by the same rules. They are not seeking truth or mutual understanding. They are seeking dominance. And every time you try to prove yourself to them, you become further entangled in their web. One of the most effective ways to neutralize a narcissist's power is to adopt what psychologists call the gray rock method. The concept is simple. Become as uninteresting and unresponsive as a gray rock. When the narcissist attempts to provoke you, you offer no emotional reaction. You do not argue, you do not defend, and you do not explain. You remain emotionally neutral. This approach works because narcissists crave stimulation. They want to trigger a reaction. When you deny them that reaction, you disrupt the entire dynamic. But this isn't just about outward behavior. It's also about your internal state. You can appear calm on the outside while still being emotionally hooked on the inside. True freedom comes when you no longer feel the need to react, even mentally. You see their manipulation for what it is, an attempt to control you, and you no longer take the bait. This requires developing emotional detachment, not indifference, but the ability to observe without being pulled in. When the narcissist lashes out, you ask yourself, what are they trying to make me feel? Why do they want me to react? This simple act of reflection creates space between their behavior and your emotions. It allows you to respond from a place of intention rather than reflex. At a deeper level, refusing to engage is also about reclaiming your sense of reality. Narcissists are skilled at distorting the truth. They twist facts, rewrite history, and make you question your own perceptions. Over time, you begin to doubt yourself. You wonder whether you're overreacting or whether you're the problem. This erosion of your self-trust is one of the most dangerous aspects of narcissistic abuse. And the only antidote is to hold firm to your own reality. You do this by grounding yourself in objective truth. Keep a record of what is said and done if necessary. This isn't for the narcissist's benefit, but for your own clarity. When they try to gaslight you, return to the facts. Remind yourself of what you know to be true, and trust that truth over their version of reality. This mental discipline protects you from being pulled into their distortions. It is also crucial to refusing to engage is not just an act of self-protection, it is an act of liberation. Ultimately, the greatest victory over a narcissist is to live as though their influence no longer matters. It's to reclaim your emotional autonomy, to trust your own perceptions, and to refuse to be defined by their narrative. And when you reach that place, their grip on you dissolves, not because they have changed, but because you have. You have chosen freedom over entanglement, truth over distortion, and self-respect over submission. And when you stop playing their game, they lose the ability to play you. The fourth critical move to break free from a narcissist's grip is to establish firm, unwavering boundaries and to enforce them without apology. This may sound simple in theory, but in practice, it is one of the most challenging and transformative actions you can take. Boundaries are not just about limiting external behavior. They are about defining the limits of what you will and will not allow in your life. And when you draw those lines clearly, without justifying, negotiating, or bending, you reclaim a level of personal authority that a narcissist cannot tolerate. Why is this so crucial? Because narcissists thrive in environments where boundaries are blurred. They exploit emotional access, manipulate uncertainty, and push past limits to maintain control. If you lack firm boundaries, you become a pliable object in their world, someone who can be molded to serve their needs. And they are remarkably skilled at testing and eroding these limits, often in subtle ways. Perhaps they start by disregarding small requests like showing up late or dismissing your feelings, but over time, those small intrusions snowball into larger violations, insults, betrayals, and outright emotional domination. And once the narcissist realizes there are no real consequences for their actions, they become emboldened. Setting boundaries disrupts this pattern at its core. It is a declaration that your emotional, psychological, and even physical space is not open for manipulation. And more importantly, it is a demonstration that their tactics no longer hold the same sway over you. But here's where most people falter. They set boundaries with words, but not with actions. They start by disregarding small requests like showing up late or dismissing your feelings. But over time, those small intrusions snowball into larger violations, insults, betrayals, and outright emotional domination. And once the narcissist realizes there are no real consequences for their actions, they become emboldened. Setting boundaries disrupts this pattern at its core. It is a declaration that your emotional, psychological, and even physical space is not open for manipulation. And more importantly, it is a demonstration that their tactics no longer hold the same sway over you. But here's where most people falter. They set boundaries with words, but not with actions. They say, I won't tolerate this behavior, but when the narcissist inevitably crosses the line, there are no real consequences. And that inconsistency sends a message. Your boundaries are negotiable. To truly break free, your boundaries must be non-negotiable. They cannot be contingent on whether the narcissist approves and respects them, because they won't. Narcissists interpret flexibility as weakness. When you bend to their pressure, you confirm their belief that your reality is malleable to their will. So your task is to make your boundaries as unyielding as the law of gravity. There is no argument. There is no debate. There is simply the consequence of crossing the line. Of course, the moment you enforce real boundaries, you will encounter resistance. Narcissists do not give up control easily. When you assert yourself, you threaten their sense of dominance, and they often respond with intensified manipulation. They might gaslight you, insisting that you're being unreasonable or cruel. They might play the victim, attempting to guilt you into softening your stance. Or if those tactics fail, they might escalate to outright rage or smear campaigns, hoping to intimidate you back into compliance. This is the narcissist's last-ditch effort to break down your resolve. And many people crumble under this pressure, not because they lack strength, but because they are unprepared for the emotional backlash that comes when you stop playing by their rules. This is why emotional detachment is so vital. When you enforce boundaries, you must do so from a place of inner calm, not anger, not resentment, but clarity. You are not setting boundaries to punish the narcissist or to seek revenge. You are doing it to protect yourself and to reclaim the integrity of your own life. And once you internalize that truth, their reactions lose their power. You begin to understand that their outrage is not a reflection of your wrongdoing. It is a reflection of their inability to control you. There is another deeper deeper aspect to this. Boundaries are not just about external behavior. They are about internal beliefs. Many people struggle to enforce boundaries because deep down they are still seeking the narcissist's validation. They want the narcissist to acknowledge their worth, to recognize their pain, or to apologize for the damage caused. And as long as you are chasing that acknowledgement, your boundaries will always be vulnerable to collapse. The only way to make your boundaries unshakable is to stop needing the narcissist to validate them. You must become the sole authority over your own reality. This shift is profound. It means you no longer require the narcissist to agree with your boundaries. You no longer seek their understanding or approval. You understand at a core level that your needs are legitimate simply because they are yours. And with that realization comes an extraordinary freedom. You are no longer emotionally enslaved to their perception of you. You no longer bend yourself into impossible shapes trying to be enough for them. You decide once and for all that you are enough for yourself. And when you reach this point, the narcissist's ability to manipulate you dissolves. They cannot control what they cannot access. By holding your boundaries without apology, you close the doors through which they exert their influence. This doesn't mean they will stop trying, but their attempts will no longer land. You will watch their manipulations from a distance, unmoved, because you know where you stand. Ultimately, boundaries are not just a defense mechanism, they are a declaration of your worth. They assert that your feelings matter, your reality is valid, and your life is yours to govern. And when you hold to them unwaveringly, you send a message that no narcissist can tolerate. You do not control me. I am not available for your manipulation. And the moment you deliver that message, not just with words, but with your entire being, the narcissist's grip shatters. Not because they have changed, but because you have. The fifth crucial step to break free from a narcissist's grip is to reclaim your sense of identity, an identity that exists independent of their influence. This may sound straightforward, but it strikes at the heart of why so many people remain trapped in toxic relationships. Narcissists are skilled at dismantling your self-concept, and they do this for a very particular reason. The more confused and insecure you become about who you are, the easier you are to control. To regain your freedom, you must take back the authority over your identity and become someone they can no longer define. The mechanism by which a narcissist undermines identity is both subtle and insidious. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small, seemingly insignificant comments that cause you to question yourself. Perhaps they mock your opinions, suggesting that your perspective is naive or ill-informed. Maybe they undermine your decisions, implying that you're too emotional or irrational to trust your own judgment. Over time, these criticisms accumulate, and when they come from someone whose validation you value, whether it's a romantic partner, a parent, or a boss, they begin to shape how you see yourself. You start to internalize their voice as if it were your own. That is the trap. When you no longer trust your own mind, you become dependent on the narcissist to interpret reality for you. And they are more than willing to provide that interpretation, an interpretation that always casts them as superior and you as inadequate. This dynamic serves their need for dominance. If you're constantly questioning yourself, you'll hesitate to challenge their behavior, you'll second-guess your perceptions, even when they clearly mistreat you. And once they have you in that place of psychological uncertainty, their power over you is absolute. To break free, you must reverse this process. You must take conscious, deliberate steps to reclaim your identity, and to do so outside the framework they've created. This is not an intellectual exercise. It is a profound restructuring of how you relate to yourself. And it begins with one critical realization. Your identity cannot be handed to you by anyone else. It is yours to define and only yours. What does this look like in practice? First, it requires you to separate their voice from your own. This is not easy, especially if you've spent years absorbing their version of who you are. But it is possible. You must start paying attention, real attention, to the patterns of thought that emerge when you question yourself. Whose voice is telling you that you're not good enough? Who first made you feel that your feelings were a burden? These are not arbitrary questions. They are essential for identifying the ways you've internalized their narrative. Once you begin to recognize those patterns, you can start to dismantle them. But recognition alone is not enough. You must replace their voice with your own. This perceptions, even when they conflict with what the narcissist wants you to believe. If you feel disrespected, that feeling is valid, no matter how much they try to convince you otherwise. If you sense manipulation, your intuition is worth trusting, no matter how much they mock your sensitivity. The act of trusting yourself again is revolutionary because it dismantles the very foundation of their control. But reclaiming your identity is not just about rejecting their narrative. It's about rediscovering who you are outside of their influence. This can be difficult, especially if the relationship has consumed your sense of self. Many people, after years of being entangled with a narcissist, find themselves asking, who am I when I'm not trying to please them? That question can feel disorienting, even frightening, but it is also the doorway to freedom. Start small. Identify the parts of yourself that you sacrifice to maintain their approval. What hobbies did you abandon because they ridiculed? What dreams did you suppress because they dismissed them as foolish? What truths did you deny to avoid conflict? Reclaiming your identity means revisiting those lost pieces of yourself and bringing them back to life on your terms. And here's the paradox. The more you reclaim your identity, the less power the narcissist has over you. Why? Because their control depends on your uncertainty. When you are clear about who you are, their manipulation loses its grip. They cannot redefine someone who is no longer seeking their approval. They cannot destabilize someone who stands firmly in their own truth. And this realization terrifies them because it signals the collapse of the psychological power structure they worked so hard to build. But be prepared. The moment you begin to reclaim yourself, the narcissist will notice, and they will react. Sometimes it's subtle, a sarcastic comment designed to make you doubt your newfound confidence. Other times it's overt, a full-scale attempt to drag you back into the identity they created for you. This reaction is not a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're succeeding. Their panic is proof that you're slipping out of their grasp. The key is to remain steadfast. Do not justify your choices. Do not seek their validation. You don't need their permission to be who you are. And when you stop seeking it, you remove the last remaining chain they hold over you. In the end, the greatest act of defiance against a narcissist is to become someone they cannot control. When you know who you are, when you trust your reality and live according to your own values, you become immune to their manipulation. Their words lose their sting, their judgment loses its weight, and their power over you crumbles. And perhaps the most profound truth is this: your identity was never truly lost. It was always there, waiting for you to reclaim it. And once you do, you'll realize that the grip they had on you was nothing more than an illusion. Because no one, not even the most manipulative person, can define who you are without your consent. And the moment you revoke that consent, you set yourself narcissists train you to prioritize their needs above your own. Reversing that pattern means reclaiming your right to pursue joy and purpose, independent of anyone else's opinion. Revisit the interests and passions that once defined you. If you abandon a creative pursuit because they mocked it, pick it back up. If you lost touch with friendships because they isolated you, rebuild those connections. These actions are not just about distraction, they are about reclaiming your autonomy. And here's something fundamental. As you begin to reorient your life, you must let go of the need for them to notice or care. This is where many people get stuck. It's tempting to want your independence to serve as a form of revenge, to imagine that your happiness will somehow punish them. But if your healing is still oriented around their reaction, you remain trapped in their game. True liberation happens when you reach the point where their opinion is irrelevant. When you no longer need them to validate your growth, their grip on you shatters. This process also requires setting firm emotional boundaries, not just externally, but internally. You cannot control whether they try to provoke you, guilt you, or lure you back into their web, but you can control your response. And the most powerful response is indifference. Narcissists crave an emotional reaction, whether positive or negative, because it reinforces their sense of importance. When you deny them that reaction, not through coldness or hostility, but through genuine disinterest, you communicate that they no longer have power over you. And nothing unsettles a narcissist more than the realization that they no longer control your emotional state. But perhaps the most profound part of this process is the transformation that happens within you. Breaking free from a narcissist is not just about escaping their external influence. It's about confronting the parts of yourself that allowed them to have that influence in the first place. What wounds made you susceptible to their manipulation? What insecurities did they exploit? And more importantly, how can you heal those vulnerabilities so that no one else can ever wield that kind of power over you again? This kind of inner work requires courage. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about yourself and your patterns. But the reward is profound, because once you've done this work, no one can ever take your freedom away from you again. You will no longer be drawn into relationships where your worth is dependent on someone else's approval. You will no longer tolerate manipulation disguised as love. And you will no longer allow anyone to define who you are or what you deserve. In the end, the most powerful way to break free from a narcissist's grip is to build a life so full, so rich with meaning, that they simply become irrelevant. They become a footnote in your story, not the main narrative. And when you reach that point, you will realize something profound. The prison they held you in was never as strong as it seemed. Because the moment you stopped allowing them to define your reality, their power over you ceased to exist. And that is true freedom. Freedom no one can ever take from you again.
It's not too late to outgrow the family firm.
Good one.
Break the cycle in the thick of genetics.
When you find yourself entangled with a narcissist, it is easy to believe that the battle is merely about words, behaviors, or misunderstandings. But that perspective only scratches the surface. What you were truly facing was something far deeper, a spiritual conflict that tested the very core of your identity. This wasn't just about surviving manipulation or enduring emotional pain. It was about whether you could hold on to your truth when someone worked relentlessly to distort it. And that kind of battle is not merely psychological, it is profoundly spiritual. At the heart of the narcissistic dynamic lies a fundamental tension between truth and deception. Narcissists, by their very nature, are masters of illusion. They craft false realities not just for those around them, but for themselves. Their survival depends on maintaining a facade, an image of superiority and invulnerability, because beneath that facade lies an emptiness they cannot bear to face. When you entered their world, you didn't just encounter a difficult person, you stepped into a battleground where truth itself was under attack. And here's the critical point. The more authentic and grounded you are in truth, the greater the threat you pose to that illusion. Your clarity, your ability to see things as they are, is a direct challenge to their carefully constructed this is why many narcissists escalate their behavior when you begin to detach emotionally. They sense, often before you fully realize it, that their hold over you is slipping. And they know, consciously or unconsciously, that the only way to maintain that hold is to reassert control over your perception of reality. Yet once you see the truth clearly, you cannot unsee it. When you align yourself with truth, when you ground yourself in what is real and refuse to accept anything less, you transcend the power they once held over you. And that is the ultimate victory. Not merely that you walked away, but that you emerged with your soul intact. You faced the darkness, and instead of being consumed by it, you became stronger, clearer, and more rooted in who you truly are. In the end, the most profound battles are never just external. They are the battles over who we become in the face of opposition. And your battle with the narcissist was precisely that. A confrontation with forces that sought to break you, but instead revealed the depth of your strength. And once you have seen that strength within yourself, no one, not even the most skilled manipulator, can take it away. When you reflect on your battle with the narcissist, it is tempting to view it as an isolated experience, an unfortunate encounter with a difficult person. But if you're willing to look deeper, you'll see that the struggle you faced is connected to something far larger. It touches on patterns that didn't begin with you. In many cases, your battle was part of a broader generational cycle of dysfunction, one that you were uniquely called to break. And that's no small task. In fact, it may be one of the most profound responsibilities a person can carry. Generational patterns of dysfunction don't just appear out of nowhere. They're passed down, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but always with a kind of inevitability unless someone is willing to confront them. A relationship with a narcissist often reveals these patterns in striking ways. Maybe you found yourself tolerating emotional abuse because at some point you were conditioned to believe that love and pain coexist. Perhaps you ignored your own needs because you grew up in an environment where your feelings were dismissed or minimized. These aren't random traits. They're learned responses, often inherited from a family system that failed to prioritize truth, accountability, or emotional health. The narcissist, in this sense, becomes a mirror, reflecting back the unresolved wounds that have traveled through your lineage. And this is part of what makes the experience so disorienting. You're not just fighting an external oppressor. You're grappling with the invisible weight of beliefs and behaviors that may have shaped your family for generations. And whether you recognize it or not, you are placed in that battle for a reason, because in many cases you are the one chosen to end the cycle. But breaking generational cycles is not a passive process. It demands something from you, a willingness to confront what others have avoided. It means looking at patterns of denial, emotional neglect, and manipulation and choosing not to repeat them. And that's hard work because for many people, these patterns are familiar. They become a kind of emotional inheritance. It is easier in some ways to perpetuate what you know than to disrupt it. And that's exactly why narcissists often thrive in family systems where dysfunction has been normalized. They exploit the silence, the avoidance, and the unspoken rules that protect the status quo. When you engage in a relationship with a narcissist, you're not just dealing with their individual pathology, you're confronting an entire framework of relational dysfunction. And here's the painful truth: if you hadn't been conditioned in some way to tolerate it, you likely wouldn't have stayed. That's not a statement of blame, it's an acknowledgement of how deeply these patterns run. The narcissist behavior taps into the parts of you that were shaped by that inheritance. Your desire to be seen, to be valued, to prove your worth. And once you're entangled in that dynamic, it can feel almost impossible to break free. But something extraordinary happens when you do. By walking away, by refusing to participate in the lie, you interrupt the cycle. You say, consciously or not, "This ends with me." And that declaration has ripple effects that extend far beyond yourself. It means that future generations, whether your own children or those you influence, will not inherit the same patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse. It means that the next chapter of your family story is written not from a place of pain, but from a place of truth. And let's be honest, there is a reason why not everyone breaks free. It's costly to be the one who stands up and says, "I will not continue this." It costs you relationships, sometimes with people you love. It costs you comfort. Because stepping into truth often requires you to face realities that are easier to avoid, and it costs you the illusion that if you just try harder, love will heal everything. The truth is, love cannot fix what another person refuses to confront, and no amount of sacrifice on your part will redeem someone who is committed to maintaining their illusion of superiority. So, why you? Why were you the one chosen to fight this battle? Maybe it's because you were strong enough to see what others could not. Maybe it's because something in you, the part that refuses to be broken, recognized that there is a better way to live. Or maybe simply you were the person willing to tell the truth when everyone else was invested in the lie, and that matters. Because the moment you choose truth over comfort, you change the trajectory, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. This is why the narcissists fight so hard to keep you under their control. It isn't just about you as an individual, it's about maintaining a system that relies on your silence. The moment you begin to wake up, to name what's happening, to reject the manipulation, you threaten the entire structure. And narcissists know, on some level, that once one person breaks free, others will follow. Your courage creates a path that others can walk. And while the battle is undeniably painful, the freedom it creates is not just personal, it's generational. So, if you wonder whether the struggle was worth it, consider this. Because of your willingness to confront the truth, someone else won't have to fight the same battle. You are not simply surviving, you are transforming what has been handed down. And by doing so, you are proving that no matter how deeply rooted the dysfunction, it is not inevitable. It can end. And it can end with you. When you reflect on your experience with a narcissist, it's tempting to frame the battle as a struggle between their dysfunction and your innocence. And while there's truth to that, narcissists do engage in deeply destructive behaviors. It's not the whole picture. The reality is more complex and, frankly, more uncomfortable. The narcissist didn't just impose themselves upon you. In a profound way, they exposed something within you, something unresolved, something vulnerable, that allowed their manipulation to take root. That's a difficult truth to face, but it's also the most empowering one. Because if the narcissist's control was rooted in your unresolved wounds, then their power over you wasn't absolute. It was conditional. It required your participation, whether through your need for validation, your difficulty enforcing boundaries, or your unconscious belief that love must be earned through suffering. And once you recognize that, you realize something vital. The end of their control doesn't just come from walking away. It comes from addressing the parts of yourself that let them in. Think about it. If you had no vulnerabilities, no places where self-doubt, fear, or unmet needs lingered, how could a narcissist gain influence over you in the first place? Their tactics wouldn't land. The gaslighting wouldn't make you question your reality. The blame shifting wouldn't make you second guess yourself. The emotional withholding wouldn't hook into a desperate craving to be seen. These manipulations only work when they find fertile ground. And that ground, more often than not, is the unresolved pain you carry. For many people, this pain traces back to childhood, long before the narcissist appeared. If you grew up in an environment where your emotional needs were minimized or where love was conditional, you learned, whether consciously or not, that your worth was tied to what you could provide, not to who you inherently were. That's a powerful script to internalize. And when someone like a narcissist enters your life, they don't introduce that script, they activate it, they play on it, and in doing so, they reveal it. This doesn't mean you're to blame for their behavior, far from it, but it does mean that your entanglement with them holds a kind of mirror to your inner world. What did you tolerate and why? What were you afraid of losing? What story about yourself made their treatment of you seem acceptable, even familiar? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the doorway to freedom. Because once you see those patterns clearly, you have a choice. You can continue living by those old narratives, or you can rewrite them. And here's something even more profound. The narcissist, as destructive as they were, may have been a necessary catalyst for this process. Without their manipulation, those deep wounds might have remained hidden, quietly shaping your relationships and self-concept without your awareness. But when a narcissist comes into your life, They don't operate subtly. Their tactics are extreme, their demands relentless, and in that intensity, everything unresolved within you gets pulled to the surface. You probably noticed this. The longer you stayed in the relationship, the more you felt like you were losing yourself. But what was really happening, the self you were losing, wasn't the real you. It was the false identity you had constructed to survive your earlier pain. The identity that said you had to please others to be worthy. The identity that said conflict was dangerous and boundaries were selfish. The identity that said enduring mistreatment was the price of being loved. And once that false self began to crumble, something else began to emerge. The part of you that knew on a visceral level that you deserved better. That part might have been quiet at first. It might have come through as a faint whisper, a sense of dis-ease, a feeling that something wasn't right. But over time, as the narcissist's behavior became impossible to ignore, that inner voice grew louder, and eventually it became impossible to silence. That voice is your truth, and ironically it was the narcissist's relentless attempts to suppress it that caused it to strengthen. Every time they twisted reality, your soul pushed back. Every time they dismissed your feelings, something inside you cried out for validation. What began as a battle between you and them became a battle between your false self and your authentic self. And if you're here now, if you've begun to recognize the depth of their manipulation, you've already chosen authenticity. You've already begun to reclaim who you truly are. But this reclamation isn't automatic. It requires conscious effort. You have to ask hard questions and be willing to face the answers. Why did you let them stay as long as you did? What part of you believed their love, if you could earn it, was worth the pain? These aren't questions to shame yourself with. They're questions that liberate you, because once you understand the emotional wounds they exploited, you can begin to heal them. And when those wounds heal, the kind of power they held over you becomes impossible for anyone else to replicate. The real victory isn't just that you escaped the narcissist. It's that you emerged from the battle with a deeper understanding of yourself. You faced the parts of yourself that were fragmented, the wounds that were unseen, and you brought them into the light. And once those wounds are seen and healed, they lose their power to control you. In the end, the narcissist didn't just reveal who they were, they revealed who you are. And as painful as the battle was, it gifted you something invaluable, a clarity about yourself that you may never have gained otherwise. That clarity is your power, and once you've claimed it, no one, not even the most skilled manipulator, can take it from you. One of the most profound realizations you come to after enduring a battle with a narcissist is that their control over you was never really about love. It may have felt like love at times, intense, all-consuming, even euphoric, but in reality what you experienced was something else entirely. It was a performance, a calculated manipulation designed not to nurture or support you, but to serve the narcissist's need for power, validation, and dominance. And once you see that truth clearly, it changes everything. Because here's the thing, real love is rooted in freedom. It allows you to be fully yourself without fear of punishment or abandonment. It nurtures your growth, respects your individuality, and fosters mutual trust. But what you experienced with the narcissist was the opposite. It was conditional, transactional, and deeply binding. Their version of love wasn't about seeing you as an independent, sovereign individual. It was about possession, and possession always comes with an agenda, to control, to dominate, and ultimately to maintain a power dynamic that keeps you small and dependent. The narcissist's need for control isn't random. It comes from a profound sense of inner emptiness, one they cannot acknowledge, let alone confront. At the core of the narcissistic personality lies a fragile, fractured sense of self. Despite their outward arrogance, they are fundamentally insecure, and that insecurity drives their need to dominate others. But rather than seeking healing, they adopt a defensive posture. They project strength, superiority, and entitlement as a way to cover the gaping void within them. And how do they sustain this illusion? By drawing energy from others, by controlling and diminishing those close to them. This is why your independence was such a threat. The more you asserted your autonomy, whether through expressing your needs, setting boundaries, or questioning their behavior, the more unstable their illusion became. You weren't just challenging their authority, you were exposing their inner weakness. And for a narcissist, There is no greater fear than having their carefully curated image fall apart. That's why they work so tirelessly to undermine your confidence. It's not accidental, it's strategic. Because the more confused, exhausted, and self-doubting you become, the easier it is for them to maintain their position of power. But the irony is this: the very act of trying to control you revealed their own lack of control. A person who is genuinely strong doesn't need to dominate others. Real strength is self-sufficient. It allows others to exist as they are without feeling threatened. The narcissist, on the other hand, cannot tolerate your freedom because it reflects their lack of it. So their manipulations become a desperate attempt to tether you emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes even spiritually to their broken reality. And yet, despite their efforts, you found a way to break free. That's no small thing. It means you reached a point where their illusion no longer worked, where you saw through the performance and recognized that what they were offering wasn't love, but a distortion of it. And the moment you saw that truth clearly, something inside you shifted. Their power over you began to crack. Because once you understand that their control was always based on deception, it loses its grip. But let's be honest, walking away from that kind of manipulation isn't just an external act. It's an internal revolution. It requires you to deprogram the beliefs that kept you bound to them in the first place. And one of the most insidious beliefs they implant is the idea that without them you are nothing, that their approval is the only thing that gives you worth. It's a lie, of course, but it's a persuasive one, because when someone consistently undermines your sense of self, it becomes easy to internalize their narrative. You begin to confuse their validation with your identity, as though who you are is contingent on their recognition. But it was losing their ability to define you. Because once you reclaim your identity, their influence collapses. And that's exactly what happens when you walk away, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. You strip them of the power to shape how you see yourself. And that, more than anything, is what breaks their control. In many ways, your freedom becomes their defeat. Because every time you choose to trust your own perception over their manipulation, you dismantle the illusion they tried to impose on you. Every act of self-assertion, every boundary you enforce, and every truth you speak is a direct challenge to the lie that they hold authority over your life. And perhaps the most powerful thing you do, the thing they can never undo, is reclaim your right to define yourself. And that's the real victory. It's not just that you escape their control, it's that you emerged from the battle with a clearer sense of who you are. They wanted to reduce you to a pawn in their game, but instead, you became something else entirely. Someone capable of standing in your truth, independent of anyone else's approval. And once you claim that truth, no one, not even the most skilled manipulator, can take it from you. The most profound realization you can walk away with is this: their control was always an illusion. It only worked as long as you believed it did. But the moment you recognized your inherent worth, the moment you stopped seeking their permission to exist, their entire framework fell apart. And in that realization, you didn't just free yourself, you proved that no one, not even a narcissist, gets to define who you are. One of the most transformative truths to grasp is that your battle with a narcissist was never just about them, it was also about you. Not in the sense that you caused their behavior or were responsible for their cruelty. That's a trap many people fall into, often because narcissists excel at shifting blame. But the deeper truth is this: the experience forced you to confront parts of yourself that otherwise might have remained hidden. And while the pain they inflicted was very real, so too was the growth it demanded of you. Think about the patterns you began to notice as the relationship unraveled. The constant second-guessing, the erosion of your self-confidence, the sense that you had to walk on eggshells. These were not just reactions to their manipulation. They were signs of something deeper. Signs that you had, perhaps unknowingly, internalized beliefs that left you vulnerable to their influence. Beliefs about your worth, your right to be treated with dignity, and your ability to trust your own perceptions. The narcissist didn't plant those beliefs in you. They simply exploited what was already there. And that's the uncomfortable truth many people avoid confronting. It's easier to paint the narcissist as a villain, and in many ways they are, but that framing alone doesn't explain why their tactics worked. Why did their gaslighting make you question your reality? Why did their devaluation make you cling harder instead of walking away? Why did their approval feel so essential even as they treated you with contempt? The answers to these questions don't lie in them, they lie in you. Somewhere along the line, long before the narcissist entered your life, you learned to associate love with conditions. You learned to tolerate mistreatment in the hope of being chosen. You learned that your needs were secondary and that keeping the peace was more important than protecting yourself. And these unconscious scripts created an opening, a way for the narcissist to establish control without you even realizing it. But here's where the story shifts. Because while the narcissist exposed these wounds, they also gave you the opportunity, the necessity to heal them. And that's no small thing. Most people carry their unexamined pain through life, allowing it to quietly shape their relationships and self-perception. But your experience was too intense to ignore. It pushed those wounds to the surface in a way that demanded your attention. And while that process was excruciating, it also held the potential for profound transformation. You began to see the ways you had abandoned yourself, how often you silenced your intuition, minimized your needs, or stayed quiet to avoid conflict. And you started to recognize that the battle wasn't just about escaping their manipulation, it was about reclaiming your voice, your power, your right to exist on your own terms. But here's the thing about reclaiming yourself. It's not a passive process. It requires deliberate, often painful self-examination. You had to ask yourself hard questions. What made me stay? Why did I believe their validation was worth my suffering? What part of me was willing to lose myself, to hold on to someone who never really saw me? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are the key to freedom. Because once you understand the emotional patterns they exploited, you are no longer bound by them. And as you engage with these questions, something remarkable happens. You begin to rebuild yourself, not in the image of who the narcissist wanted you to be, but in alignment with who you truly are. You become more discerning, more protective of your energy, and more unwilling to tolerate relationships that require you to diminish yourself. In a very real way, the battle with the narcissist becomes a catalyst for becoming the strongest, most authentic version of yourself. This transformation is not just about survival, it's about transcendence. You didn't merely endure their abuse, you used it as fuel for your own evolution. And that is something the narcissist will never understand. Their entire identity is built on avoiding self-reflection. They cannot face their own emptiness, which is why they seek to control others in the first place. But you faced yourself. You walked through the fire, and instead of being consumed by it, you were refined. And here's the final paradoxical truth. The narcissist's greatest fear was never losing you. It was losing their ability to control you. And once you claimed your autonomy, once you decided that you were the authority on your own worth, their power collapsed. Not because you fought them directly, but because you no longer needed their validation. And without that need, their influence became meaningless. In the end, your battle with the narcissist wasn't just about breaking free from their grasp. It was about breaking free from the internal patterns that made that grasp possible. And that kind of freedom, the freedom to trust yourself, to honor your needs, and to walk away from anything that diminishes you, is a power no one can take from you, not even the most skilled manipulator. The greatest victory is not that you survived the narcissist, it's that you emerged from the battle with a deeper, unshakable understanding of who you are. And once you know that, truly no one can ever control you again. When you finally break free from a narcissist's grip, something profound happens, not just on the surface, but deep within you. It's not merely a return to who you were before the relationship. It's an emergence into something greater, an evolved version of yourself that could only be forged through the fire of that experience. And this transformation is not accidental. It's the natural outcome of facing a profound psychological battle and choosing not only to survive, but to transcend. You see, every confrontation with darkness holds the potential for two outcomes: destruction or transformation. The narcissist's aim, whether they are consciously aware of it or not, is to reduce you, to shrink your spirit, to dismantle your confidence, and to make you question your worth so profoundly that you become a shadow of yourself. But if you refuse to be destroyed, if instead you confront the truth and reclaim your identity, you undergo a metamorphosis. You don't just escape their control. You become someone they no longer have the power to affect. This kind of growth isn't comfortable. It requires you to confront painful truths, not only about the narcissist, but about yourself. It means recognizing the ways you were complicit in your own suffering, not through blame, but through understanding. Maybe you ignored your intuition. Maybe you prioritized their needs over your own. Maybe you believed on some level that love meant enduring pain. And as harsh as these realizations can be, they are also the doorway to freedom. Because once you see the patterns clearly, you are no longer bound by them. What's extraordinary is that this process does more than just heal you, it equips you. You become psychologically stronger, more discerning, less susceptible to manipulation. You begin to trust yourself again, perhaps for the first time in a long while. And that self-trust is the foundation of a new kind of power, one that is rooted not in the approval of others, but in your own unshakable sense of worth. The narcissist never wanted you to reach this point. Their entire strategy depends on your self-doubt. They rely on your willingness to question your reality and suppress your instincts. But when you walk away, when you reclaim your agency, you dismantle their influence in the most definitive way possible. And what's more, you carry those lessons forward. You become the kind of person who no longer tolerates manipulation, who recognizes red flags early, and who refuses to negotiate your dignity. This transformation extends beyond just protecting yourself. It changes the way you engage with the world. You start to move differently. You become more intentional about the relationships you allow into your life. You prioritize authenticity and mutual respect, not because you are cynical, but because you've learned through pain that anything less is a form of self-betrayal. And when you stop betraying yourself, you step into a kind of wholeness that no external force can undermine. There is a psychological concept that speaks to this transformation: post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that following deep emotional wounds, individuals can emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient than they were before. It doesn't minimize the pain you endured. It acknowledges that the pain, as unjust as it was, became the catalyst for your growth. And this growth isn't superficial, it's structural. It alters the very foundation of who you are. Think of it this way. The narcissist sought to break you. Every manipulation, every cruel word, every act of emotional withholding was designed to destabilize you. But instead of crumbling under that pressure, you used it to refine yourself. And this isn't just a psychological shift, it's a spiritual one. There's an ancient wisdom that says what was meant to harm you, God will use for your good. That isn't just a comforting phrase, it reflects a profound reality. The very thing that was meant to destroy you became the means by which you became unbreakable. And here's the part the narcissist never anticipated. Your healing doesn't just liberate you, it exposes them, because the moment you stop playing their game, the illusion they created begins to fall apart. They can only maintain their power by keeping you confused and dependent, but when you step into clarity, when you know your value and refuse to compromise it, their control evaporates. And in that moment, you're not just free, you're untouchable. What you must understand is that this transformation is permanent. Once you've seen through the narcissist's illusions, you can never unsee them. Once you've reclaimed your voice, you will never give it away again. And once you've learned to trust yourself, you become immune to the kind of manipulation that once held you captive. That's the real victory, not just that you escaped, but that you became someone who can never be captured again. So when you reflect on your battle with the narcissist, don't just see it as a period of suffering. See it as the crucible where you became who you were meant to be. You didn't just survive. You emerged wiser, stronger, and more grounded in your truth. And that transformation, that's something no one, not even the most skilled manipulator, can ever take away from you. A narcissist's entire psychological framework is built upon control. It's not just about manipulating situations, it's about shaping the reality of those around them to reinforce their fragile, inflated self-image. At the core of their behavior is a profound insecurity, though they will never openly admit it. This insecurity fuels an insatiable need to dominate their environment, particularly the people closest to them. When you walk away, you disrupt this carefully curated system of control, and for the narcissist, that's more than just a setback. It's an existential threat. Think about it. A narcissist cannot stand to feel powerless because their sense of identity is built on the illusion of superiority. Their control over you isn't accidental. It's deliberate, calculated, and necessary for their psychological survival. Every manipulation, every passive-aggressive remark, and every emotional outburst is designed to keep you trapped in their orbit. When you finally leave, you're not just removing yourself physically, you're shattering the very structure that holds their false sense of self together. What happens when that control is broken? Panic. The narcissist's ability to shape the narrative collapses, and with it, the illusion that they are in charge. This isn't simply a blow to their ego, it's a direct confrontation with the reality they work so hard to deny. They panic because they realize they no longer have the power to influence your emotional state. And for a narcissist, losing that power means losing themselves. They no longer have the ability to twist your perception, to gaslight you into doubting your reality, or to pull you back into their chaotic world with a simple gesture or word. But here's the paradox. They need you more than you need them, though they would never allow you to see that. A narcissist's identity is a performance, and they need an audience to validate that performance. Without someone to control, their carefully maintained facade starts to crack. And when you step out of that dynamic, you send an undeniable message. You are no longer willing to play the role they've assigned to you. This loss of control terrifies them because without you as their emotional mirror, they are left alone with their own emptiness. What's more revealing is how much energy a narcissist invests in maintaining the illusion of dominance. It's not enough for them to simply feel in control. They need you to believe it too. The moment you no longer accept their version of reality, they begin to lose their grip. And that's why your decision to walk away is so powerful. You aren't just leaving a toxic relationship, you're reclaiming your right to define your own reality. And in doing so, you deprive them of the very thing they rely on to sustain their fragile identity. This is why they panic, because your departure is evidence that they are not as powerful as they believe themselves to be. Narcissists live in a world where appearances are everything. To those on the outside, they want to project an image of perfection, charming, successful, and in control. But that image is a mask. And when you leave, especially if you do so calmly and decisively, you threaten to pull that mask away. You reveal that beneath the surface lies a person who cannot function without dominating others. It's important to recognize that this panic isn't a sign of love or remorse. It's about self-preservation. Narcissists do not experience relationships in the way that emotionally healthy people do. To them, relationships are transactional, a means of obtaining the validation and control they crave. When you remove yourself from that equation, you take away their ability to feed their ego, and without that supply, they begin to unravel. But here's the most crucial insight. When you walk away and refuse to be manipulated, you break their power in the most profound way possible. You demonstrate that their control was always an illusion, contingent on your willingness to participate. By stepping out of their grasp, you force them to confront the one thing they fear the most, the truth that they are not omnipotent. And that's why your departure changes everything. It's not just about freeing yourself, though that is an enormous victory. It's about dismantling the very foundation of their power structure. They panic because, deep down, they know they can no longer shape your reality. And once you see the truth, that their power was never as absolute as they wanted you to believe, you become untouchable. So when a narcissist panics as you walk away, understand this. It's not because they're losing you, it's because they're losing the illusion that they were ever in control. And once that illusion is broken, they have nothing left to hold on to. You take back your power the moment you refuse to let them define who you are. And in doing so, you reveal the truth they work so hard to hide. They you were never as powerful as they wanted you to think. One of the most unsettling truths about a narcissist is how much they depend on your emotional reactions to sustain their fragile sense of identity. It's not an exaggeration to say that your attention, whether positive or negative, functions like oxygen for them. Without it, their carefully constructed facade begins to crumble. This is why your decision to disengage and leave triggers such an intense, panicked response. You're not just walking away from a toxic relationship. You're withdrawing the very substance that keeps their sense of self afloat. When you're enmeshed with a narcissist, your emotional landscape becomes their playground. They learn to read your vulnerabilities, your hopes, your insecurities, anything they can use to manipulate and maintain control. What they want, fundamentally, is not a partnership based on mutual respect, but a dynamic where they are the center of your world. And in many cases, they succeed by fostering emotional dependency. They create cycles of idealization and devaluation, drawing you in with praise and affection only to tear you down when you are most vulnerable. This cycle is designed to keep you destabilized and doubting yourself, which makes you easier to control. The moment you step back and refuse to engage in these emotional games, you deliver a blow they cannot easily recover from. Why? Because without your emotional responses, without your anger, your tears, your desperate attempts to make sense of their behavior, they are left with nothing but themselves. And for a narcissist, being alone with their true self is a terrifying prospect. Their identity is not built on a secure, integrated sense of who they are. It is a fragile, externalized construct that requires constant reinforcement. And when you stop providing that reinforcement, the cracks in their facade become impossible to ignore. It's crucial to understand that narcissists are not merely self-centered people with oversized egos. At the core of narcissism lies a profound and often unacknowledged emptiness, a void that no amount of external validation can fill. This is why they are so obsessed with maintaining control over others. It isn't just about power for its own sake. It's about avoiding the terrifying realization that, without an audience to reflect back a sense of importance, they feel hollow and insignificant. When you leave and take your emotional energy with you, you force them to confront the very void they've been running from their entire lives. But here's where things get even more interesting. Narcissists do not respond to loss the way emotionally healthy people do. For most people, losing someone they care about brings grief, reflection, and eventually a deeper understanding of themselves and their relationships. But for a narcissist, your departure's experience is a profound narcissistic injury, an assault on the grandiose self-image they work so hard to maintain. They cannot process this loss as a normal person would, because doing so would require acknowledging that they are flawed, vulnerable, and in need of growth. And for someone trapped in the narcissistic mindset, admitting these truths feels like psychological death. This is why they panic. The absence of your emotional responses doesn't just leave them feeling powerless, it exposes the fact that their entire strategy for self-preservation depends on the manipulation of others. And when you refuse to play that game, you reveal a truth they cannot bear to face. They are not in control. They never were. The power they seemed to wield was always contingent on your willingness to react, to care, to be drawn back in. Without that, their illusion collapses. Now consider the implications of this. Your silence, your refusal to engage, strips them of their ability to shape your reality. And it does something even more profound. It forces them to see themselves as they truly are. This is a deeply destabilizing experience for someone whose entire existence is predicated on avoiding such self-examination. And while they may lash out, attempt to provoke you, or scramble to regain control, underneath that frantic behavior lies a fundamental truth. They are terrified of being exposed. And here's the final critical point. When you withhold your emotional responses, you reclaim your power in the most profound way possible. You are no longer a pawn in their psychological games. You cease to be a source of narcissistic supply. And in doing so, you remind them, and more importantly yourself, that their control was never as absolute as it seemed. What the narcissist fears most is a person who no longer reacts, who no longer buys into their distorted version of reality, because once you reach that point, their ability to manipulate you is over. So when you finally walk away and refuse to engage, you do more than escape their grip. You dismantle the very foundation of their control. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is why they panic. Because deep down they know that without your emotional energy to sustain their illusion, they are left with the one thing they have spent their entire lives avoiding: themselves. And nothing terrifies them more than that. One of the most revealing aspects of a narcissist's psychology is how profoundly their sense of control is tied to your self-doubt. It's a delicate and insidious process, one that doesn't happen all at once, but through a slow erosion of your confidence over time. And here's the critical point. When you walk away, you disrupt that entire mechanism. You remove the foundation upon which their power is built. And nothing destabilizes a narcissist more effectively than the realization that their ability to control your perception of reality is slipping away. A narcissist's manipulation relies on a fundamental distortion of truth. They seek to rewrite the narrative, not just about who they are, but about who you are. Through a process of gaslighting, subtle criticisms, and emotional invalidation, they chip away at your ability to trust your own perceptions. And this isn't accidental. It's a deliberate strategy, because the moment you begin to question your reality, you become easier to control. If you're constantly second-guessing yourself, wondering if you're being too sensitive, too demanding, or too difficult, you're far less likely to challenge their behavior. And in that hesitation, they find their power. But when you finally walk away, you do something radical. You reassert your own perception of reality. You refuse to be defined by their distortions. And that refusal is deeply threatening to a narcissist, because it exposes the illusion they work so tirelessly to maintain. You see, the narcissist's version of reality is not grounded in truth. It's grounded in whatever narrative allows them to maintain dominance. And when you reject that narrative by leaving, you force them to confront a reality they cannot control. And for a narcissist, that loss of narrative control is deeply unsettling. It's important to understand how much energy a narcissist invests in maintaining the image they want you and the world to believe. They are constantly curating a facade of superiority, of being misunderstood, or of being the victim when it suits their purposes. This facade is not just for others, it's for themselves. Without it, they are left with the deeply uncomfortable truth of their own inadequacy. And when you walk away, you puncture that carefully crafted image. You send a message, whether consciously or not, that you no longer accept their version of reality. And that message, perhaps more than anything else, drives their panic. Think about how much effort they expend to keep you doubting yourself. Every time they gaslight you, telling you that your memory is wrong or your feelings are invalid, they are reinforcing a system of control. They are attempting to reshape your reality into something that serves their interests. And the moment you refuse to engage with that manipulation, you dismantle the very mechanism that gives them power. This is why they often react with such intensity when you begin to pull away. It isn't just about losing you as a person. It's about losing the psychological leverage that allows them to maintain their fragile sense of superiority. But here's where things become even more revealing. The narcissist's panic isn't just about losing control over you. It's about what your departure reveals to others. Narcissists are acutely aware of how they are perceived. They need to be seen as powerful, competent, or virtuous. And when you walk away, especially if you do so with clarity and strength, you threaten the image they present to the world. If you are no longer under their control, what does that say about their supposed dominance? If you can leave and thrive, what does that suggest about the reality they've constructed? Your departure doesn't just unsettle them privately, it risks exposing their lies publicly, and nothing terrifies a narcissist more than being unmasked. This is why you often see a frantic attempt to regain control after you leave. They may try to smear your reputation, rewriting the narrative so that they remain the victim and you become the villain. They might reach out with manipulative apologies or sudden declarations of love, not because they've changed, but because they are desperate to pull you back into the reality they control. But the very fact that they must resort to these tactics reveals their underlying fear. Without your cooperation, without your participation in their distortion of reality, their entire facade begins to unravel. What's most crucial to understand is that your ability to leave is evidence of something the narcissist doesn't want to acknowledge. You have agency. You have the power to define your own reality, and when you walk away, you affirm that power in a way that cannot be undone. You are no longer subject to their distortion. You are no longer caught in the cycle of doubt they so carefully crafted. And by reclaiming your sense of truth, you strip them of the one thing they cannot bear to lose, the ability to shape how you see yourself. So, when you leave a narcissist, you do more than escape their influence. You shatter the illusion that they are in control. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is why they panic. Because deep down, beneath the arrogance and manipulation, they know a truth they will never admit. Their power over you was never real. It existed only as long as you believed in their version of reality. And once you reject that narrative, they are left exposed. Not as the superior figure they pretend to be, but as someone desperately afraid of losing the control they never truly had. One of the most unsettling truths for a narcissist is that their power is entirely dependent on your emotional engagement. They thrive on your reactions, whether those reactions are positive or negative. Your anger, your confusion, your desire to explain yourself, it all feeds the machinery of their control. It gives them a sense of importance and confirms that they still have influence over your reality. But the moment you stop responding, the entire dynamic begins to collapse. And nothing induces panic in a narcissist more swiftly than the realization that they are no longer able to provoke or manipulate you. Emotional engagement is the oxygen that fuels a narcissist's sense of dominance. They do not seek connection in the way a healthy person does. Their goal is not to understand or to be understood. Instead, they are engaged in a constant pursuit of power, of establishing themselves as the center of your emotional world. When you react to their provocations, whether by defending yourself, seeking their approval, or even lashing out in frustration, you reinforce their sense that they matter, that they still have a hold over you. And that is precisely why emotional disengagement is so devastating to them. It signifies that their ability to occupy a central position in your life is slipping away. Consider how much energy a narcissist devotes to eliciting reactions. The subtle criticisms, the unpredictable mood swings, the gaslighting. It is all designed to keep you off balance and emotionally invested. When you are confused, you seek clarity. When you are hurt, you seek repair. And in both cases, you are drawn back into the narcissist's frame of reality, a frame in which they hold the power to define your sense of self. This is not accidental. It is an intentional strategy to ensure that your attention remains fixed on them. Because as long as you are emotionally entangled, you are easier to control. But when you disengage, when you stop reacting, you do something profoundly destabilizing. You break that feedback loop. You remove the source of emotional supply that the narcissist depends on. And without it, they are left to confront a reality they cannot manipulate, a reality in which they are no longer the focal point. This is why narcissists often escalate their behavior when they sense you pulling away. The more indifferent you become, the more desperate they grow. Their panic is not merely about losing you as a person, it is about losing the emotional sustenance that your reactions provide. What's fascinating here is how revealing this reaction is. If the narcissist's power were genuine, if it were rooted in something stable, they would not need your continual engagement to sustain it. But the truth is that their sense of superiority is fragile. It exists only to the degree that others affirm it. And when you refuse to engage, you expose just how dependent they are on external validation. You force them to confront the hollowness beneath their carefully curated facade. And that confrontation is something they are deeply unprepared to face. It's also worth noting that emotional disengagement threatens the narcissist's self-concept on a profound level. At the core of narcissism lies a profound insecurity, an unacknowledged fear of being insignificant or unworthy. This fear is what drives their relentless need to control how others perceive them. When you disengage, you deny them the external confirmation that props up their fragile sense of identity. And without that confirmation, their carefully constructed self-image begins to unravel. This is why they often resort to increasingly extreme measures to draw you back in. Whether through love bombing, guilt trips, or outright aggression, their goal is the same: to restore the emotional engagement that validates their existence. And yet the power to break free from this dynamic rests entirely with you. By refusing to react, by maintaining your emotional distance, you assert a fundamental truth: that your reality is not theirs to define. You reclaim the authority to determine your own worth and your own perceptions. And in doing so, you dismantle the illusion of control they have worked so hard to maintain. This is not an easy process. It requires discipline and clarity. But it is also profoundly liberating, because once you recognize that their power exists only to the extent that you grant it, you are no longer bound by their manipulations. The key here is consistency. Emotional disengagement is not a one-time act. It is a sustained commitment to withdrawing your energy from the narcissist's control. This means refusing to be drawn into pointless arguments. It means resisting the urge to explain yourself to someone who has no intention of understanding. And it means accepting that you do not need their validation to know your own worth. It is a process of psychological emancipation, one in which you reclaim the power that was always yours to begin with. And here's the profound truth: when you master the art of emotional disengagement, you become untouchable. The narcissist may try every tactic in their arsenal to regain control, but without your reactions, those tactics lose their effectiveness. You strip them of their ability to shape your reality, and in doing so, you reveal the ultimate weakness behind their facade, because without your emotional investment, they are left exposed. Not as the all-powerful figure they present to the world, but as someone who cannot stand on their own without manipulating those around them. In the end, the most powerful move you can make is not to fight the narcissist on their terms. It is to refuse to play the game at all. When you withdraw your emotional engagement, you force them to face a reality they cannot control, and in that reality, their power collapses under its own weight. The moment you stop reacting is the moment you take your power back, and once you do, you'll find that the narcissist's grip over your life was never as strong as they wanted you to believe. When you leave a narcissist, something profound begins to happen, not just to them, but to you. For perhaps the first time in a long while, you begin to reclaim your sense of self. This is no small matter. Narcissistic relationships are profoundly disorienting because they require you to shrink your needs, your voice, your identity, until you become little more than an extension of their desires. It's a slow and insidious process. Bit by bit, you learn to second-guess your perceptions. You suppress your instincts. You start to believe that your feelings are irrational, your concerns overblown, and in the end, you may barely recognize the person you've become. When you finally walk away, you initiate a process of psychological restoration. You start to remember what it feels like to trust your own judgment. You rediscover your right to feel, to assert, to exist independently, and what's crucial here is that this restoration is not just personal, it is existential. Because to reclaim your identity is to reclaim your agency, your ability to shape your own reality rather than having it dictated by someone else. That is the power the narcissist fears you will recover. Because once you do, you become someone they can no longer control. What's fascinating about narcissistic relationships is how much they rely on the erosion of your inner authority. The narcissist works systematically to undermine your confidence in your own perspective. This is why their tactics, gaslighting, blame-shifting, emotional invalidation, are so effective. If you cannot trust your own mind, you become reliant on theirs. This is not an accident. It's a deliberate strategy to keep you psychologically dependent. And the deeper that dependence grows, the easier it becomes for them to control not just what you do, but who you are. But there is something the narcissist cannot account for, something they cannot fully suppress. And that is the innate human drive for autonomy. There is a part of you, however buried, that knows when something is wrong. A part that senses the distortion. And that part does not die, it waits, it observes, and eventually it reasserts itself. That moment, when you recognize the manipulation for what it is the beginning of your freedom, because once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. The illusion cracks, and what follows is the slow but irreversible process of reclaiming yourself. When you leave, the narcissist's panic stems from this very fact. They understand on some level that if you regain your identity, you render them powerless. Their influence depends entirely on your willingness to accept their reality as truth. The moment you reject that reality, you strip them of their ability to define you, and without that power, the entire structure of their control collapses. But here's where it becomes even more profound. By reclaiming your identity, you don't just break free from one narcissist, you become immune to their kind altogether. Because the tactics they employ only work on those who are unsure of themselves, who doubt their own perceptions. When you reclaim your sense of self, you develop a psychological resilience that makes you unmanipulable. You learn to trust your intuition again. You recognize the signs of emotional coercion. And most importantly, you no longer seek validation from those who would use it to control you. And this is not just a matter of emotional healing, it is a moral imperative. Because the world is full of those who would seek to manipulate, to dominate, to bend others to their will. And if you do not know who you are, if you lack a firm grasp of your identity, you are vulnerable to their influence. To reclaim yourself, then, is not merely to heal from one person's manipulation. It is to equip yourself to walk through the world with clarity and strength. It is to become the kind of person who cannot be easily swayed or deceived. This is why the narcissist panics when you leave. They understand, perhaps better than you do at first, what it means when you reclaim your identity. It means you no longer require their approval. It means you are no longer susceptible to their manipulation. And most of all, it means you are beyond their reach. And make no mistake, this process of reclamation is not easy. It requires confronting the ways you were diminished. It means facing the pain of how much of yourself you surrendered. But the alternative is far worse. To remain under the narcissist's influence is to live as a shadow of who you were meant to be. And life is far too short and far too precious to be spent in the service of someone else's delusion. The most powerful act of defiance, then, is to reclaim yourself fully, to walk away, not just physically, but psychologically, to refuse to let their voice echo in your mind, to reclaim your thoughts, your emotions, your right to define your own reality. Because when you do, you become something the narcissist can never touch again. Free! And once you taste that freedom, once you experience what it feels like to be wholly yourself, there is no going back, because you will know with absolute certainty that your identity is yours and yours alone. And that is a power no one can ever take from you. When you leave a narcissist, there is a crucial shift that occurs, one that goes beyond mere physical or emotional separation. It is the act of reclaiming your ability to define reality on your own terms. This is no trivial matter. For as long as you remain entangled with a narcissist, your perception of truth is constantly under siege. You are subjected to a relentless process of distortion where facts become malleable, your feelings are questioned, and even your most basic understanding of reality is up for debate. And here's the fundamental truth. Control over someone's perception of reality is the ultimate form of power. Once you take that power back, you shatter the narcissist's ability to manipulate you. Narcissists thrive in environments where they can be the arbiters of truth. This is why gaslighting, a systematic attempt to make you doubt your own experiences, is one of their most potent weapons. It's not just about controlling what you do, it's about controlling how you see the world. Because if they can twist your perception enough, they can make you question your instincts, your memories, even your sanity. And once that foundation is weakened, their control becomes nearly absolute. You become dependent on their version of reality to navigate the relationship, and in that dependence lies their power. But what happens when you leave? You reclaim your ability to discern truth for yourself. And when you do that, when you refuse to allow them to define what is real, you strike at the very heart of their control. This is what drives their panic. It is not just the loss of your physical presence that unsettles them. It is the knowledge that you are now beyond their reach in a far more profound sense. You are no longer operating within the mental framework they imposed on you. You begin to see things clearly, perhaps for the first time in a long while, and that clarity is what they cannot tolerate. Because clarity is dangerous to a narcissist. It reveals the truth behind their illusions. You begin to see the manipulations for what they are, desperate attempts to hold on to power. You recognize the emotional coercion, the subtle undermining of your confidence, the constant need to keep you on unstable ground. And perhaps most importantly, you start to realize that their version of reality was never the truth. It was was only ever a projection of their own fragile ego. And here lies a profound psychological insight. People who manipulate others do so because they cannot face reality themselves. Narcissists, despite their grandiose exterior, are fundamentally insecure. Their entire identity is a carefully constructed facade, one that requires constant external validation to remain intact. And that validation comes in part from controlling how others perceive them and the world around them. So when you leave and reclaim your sense of reality, you deprive them of one of their primary means of psychological survival. And they panic because without that control, they are forced to confront the emptiness beneath the facade. But your departure does more than just destabilize the narcissist. It fundamentally transforms you. The process of reclaiming your reality is an act of psychological sovereignty. You begin to trust your perceptions again. You learn to validate your own experiences without needing external approval. And most importantly, you recognize that your mind, your ability to interpret and define the world, is yours and yours alone. This restoration of reality is not just an individual process. It has moral implications as well. Because when you allow someone else to dictate your perception of the truth, you surrender your autonomy. And autonomy, true psychological and moral independence, is the foundation upon which a meaningful life is built. To reclaim that autonomy, then, is to reassert your right to live on your own terms, to pursue truth as you see it, and to resist any force that would seek to subjugate your mind. And make no mistake, this is a battle that extends beyond your relationship with the narcissist. The world is full of people and systems that seek to shape your perceptions for their own ends. And if you do not cultivate the ability to define reality for yourself, you will always be vulnerable to those who would exploit that weakness. Walking away from a narcissist is, in that sense, an initiation into a deeper form of freedom, one where you become the ultimate authority over your own experience. And there is tremendous power in that freedom. Once you have reclaimed your reality, you cannot be manipulated in the same way again. You see the games for what they are. You recognize when someone is attempting to distort your perceptions, and you no longer allow others to dictate how you interpret your own life. This is why the narcissist panics. Because once you reach this point, you are beyond their control. And there is nothing more terrifying to someone who relies on domination than the knowledge that you are free. But this freedom comes with responsibility. You must remain vigilant. The temptation to surrender your perception to others never entirely disappears. It requires ongoing courage to trust your instincts, to speak your truth, and to hold fast to your reality in the face of opposition. But the alternative, a life spent under the control of others, is no life at all. In the end, the greatest act of defiance is to own your reality fully, to walk away not just physically, but psychologically, to refuse to let anyone else define your world. And when you do this, when you reclaim your mind, you break the narcissist's control in a way that can never be undone. Because once you know the truth, you cannot be made to forget it. And that truth, the reality that you define your own existence, is the most powerful weapon you will ever possess.
It wasn't about the right or wrong. It wasn't about survival. It was about family.
Good.
Big sacrifice.
Nobody likes a cracked windshield.
What was that?
But you can go to SafeLight.com and get it fixed now and pay later.
Awesome.
SafeLight can come to you for free. Don't wait. Get it fixed now and pay later at SafeLight.com.
SafeLight Repair, SafeLight Replace.
The corruption cover-up from senior government officials who are sworn to uphold their duties and accountability for the American public, they are the ones that violated that trust the most internally and need to be held accountable. Documents are being released weekly by Johnny Ratcliffe and Tulsi. Things like the Durham Annex, which we've known have existed this entire time, but were classified for political reasons. So we've assembled a team of accountability, and we're going to deliver for the American people.
FBI Director Kash Patel is urging congressional committees to publicly release documents related to the Durham Annex, which could prove to be the smoking gun in the Russia hoax. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Anita Vogel, along with Lydia Hu, Jason Chaffetz, and Kevin Corey. York, and this is the Big Weekend Show. Troves of documents have been declassified showing how top Obama intel officials violated standards and pressured lower-ranking officials to accept the narrative that Putin helped Trump win the 2016 election. But the declassified annex to the Durham report reveals the origins of this narrative may lie in the Clinton campaign. Emails allegedly from a George Soros-connected official describe how Hillary Clinton signed off on a plan to connect Trump with Russia, while implying the FBI would later add credibility to this claim. Joining us now for our big close-up tonight is former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. He is also a senior partner at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Mark, it's great to have you with us tonight. I want to start with this Durham Annex. What new information could be released? What can you tell us?
Well, Anita, obviously, Durham had a huge investigation that took many months. Many of us thought that it took a lot longer than it should have. And yet what we're starting to see is the coordination that happened between the Clinton campaign, between those in the three-letter agencies that we're all too familiar with. But I think the troubling thing that appears to be coming out is that over and over and over again, there was real pressure at the very top levels of these agencies to have a narrative out there that we knew was false. We knew it was false back in 2019 when this was being investigated and covered in Congress, but we also knew it was false during the first Trump administration, and yet he had to deal with it every single day.
Mark, Jason Chaffetz here. Good to see you, my friend. One of our colleagues during our time in Congress was Tulsi Gabbard, and she, now that she's the Director of National Intelligence, released new emails this week showing how James Clapper pushed officials to ignore standard procedures in order to rush out the 2017 intel assessment tying Putin to Trump. Then Director of the NSA, Mike Rogers, emailed Clapper in December of 2016 saying his team raised concerns because they weren't given sufficient access in time to review
There are people, certain types of people you should never trust, and the older you get, the more dangerous it becomes to ignore that truth, because kindness, when misapplied, is not virtuous, it's deadly. It's like giving away your last glass of water in the desert. It might feel noble, but if you don't survive the journey, what good was the sacrifice? So let me tell you something you might not want to hear, especially if you're a senior citizen. Kindness isn't always moral, not when it's handed to those who use it against you, not when it's offered to those who've shown you repeatedly that they don't deserve it. You've lived long enough, you've sacrificed, you've raised children, buried friends, watched loved ones drift away. You've endured more than most people will ever understand. And now you've earned something sacred, peace. The world doesn't just hand you peace, you have to defend it. And that means knowing who not to trust. I spoke to a man, 81 years old, brilliant, gentle, warm. He told me about his so-called friend he let into his life after his wife passed, said she was there to help, just someone to talk to, she said, but week by week she began asking for favors, small ones at first, then money, then a key to the house. He said, I wanted to believe she was good. I was lonely. And that's how it happens. It's not due to stupidity or naivete, but because of your inherent goodness and desire to believe in others, a quality you should maintain, but with discernment. Then he outlines 7 types of individuals you should never trust, and certainly never show kindness to. First, beware of those who exploit your guilt. Guilt is a potent weapon, especially against the elderly. You've lived a full life, inevitably making mistakes. Perhaps you weren't a perfect parent, or you have lingering regrets. Manipulators, particularly those close to you, are adept at twisting this guilt into obedience. They might say things like, you owe me, or you weren't there when I needed you, so now you must help me. And suddenly you're giving your pension to a child who only calls when he wants money. Or you're babysitting grandkids every day. When your body is crying out for rest, that's not love, that's penance. And it will drain the last years of your life dry if you let it. You are not required to pay for the past with your present. Make amends where necessary, yes, but do not become a slave to guilt. You don't owe anyone your joy. Second, beware of the perpetual victim. These people are experts at emotional theft. Everything in their life is someone else's fault. They've always been wrong. They're always hurting, and they make you feel like you are the answer, that if you just did more, gave more, cared more, they'd finally be okay. But they never will be, because they don't want healing. They want attention. They want control. They want you to orbit their misery like it's the sun, and you're just a moon pulled into their chaos again and again. You might start thinking, well, what kind of person would I be if I turned away from someone who's suffering? And I'll tell you, a wise one, you're not abandoning them. You're just refusing to be devoured. Third, do not trust people who dismiss your boundaries. You've earned the right to peace. You've earned the right to space to say, no, I don't want company this weekend, or no, I'm not lending any more money. Some people, especially manipulators, will lock that. You're being too sensitive. Don't let others manipulate you with claims of selfishness or family obligation. When they say, I'm family, what they often mean is they prioritize their access to you over your comfort. You have the right to establish boundaries to protect your energy. Anyone who dismisses your need for rest, solitude, or security through laughter or guilt tripping should be cut off. They don't want to be part of your life. They want to control it. Furthermore, be wary of those who become intimate too quickly. This is a common tactic used by con artists who are prevalent and frequently target older adults. They will flatter you and say all the right things to gain your trust. You're so sharp for your age. You're the kindest person I've ever met. I feel like I've known you forever, but real trust, real intimacy, it takes time. It grows in the soil of consistency, not charm. So when someone starts trying to insert themselves into your life quickly, when they want your time, your energy, your trust, your money without earning it, pull back. Kindness without caution is not kindness, it's exposure. Fifth, watch out for people who never apologize. A person who cannot admit fault is a person who cannot love you. It's that simple. If they hurt you but then blame you for being hurt, if they lie and then say you misunderstood, if they yell and then say you're too emotional, that's not love, that's gaslighting. And it's especially dangerous in old age when someone starts undermining your sense of reality. When they tell you you're confused or exaggerating or making things up, you start to doubt your own memory, your own clarity. And once they have that, they have everything they can manipulate you, take from you, control you. You must not allow that. You must believe in your own eyes, your own gut, your own wisdom. You've earned it. Sixth, beware the opportunist, masked. As a caregiver, this is a terrifying truth. Not everyone who helps you actually wants to help you. Some people hover near the vulnerable like vultures because it's easy access to control, power, and money. They offer to run your errand. They want to help with your finances. They're just trying to make things easier. And maybe they are, but maybe they aren't. And if they get angry when you ask questions, when you want to see receipts, understand where your money's going, then that's your answer. Real help is transparent. Real support is humble. If someone gets defensive the moment you question them, they're not helping, they're managing you. Don't let anyone disguise control as kindness, especially not when it concerns your health or your home. Finally, seventh, don't trust someone who only shows up when they need something. You know, this person, they disappear for months, sometimes years. Then, out of nowhere, they need a loan or a place to stay or someone to talk to because nobody else will listen. And for a moment, it feels good. It feels like you're important to get needed, but you're not a service. You're not a retirement plant. You're not a therapist on demand, and you're not a doormat. Pay attention to the people who only call when they want something, who vanish. The moment you say, no, that's not family, that's not friendship, that's a transaction. And at this stage of life, you don't have time for empty relationships. You need real ones, honest ones. People who show up when you need something. People who care even when you have nothing to offer. Let go of everyone who treats you like an opportunity instead of a person. Now, I know this isn't easy because most seniors are deeply decent people. You were raised to help, to forgive, to be the bigger person, and those are good things, but even virtues need. Even kindness must be balanced with discernment, or else it stops being virtuous. So let me be clear, it's not unkind to protect yourself. It's not selfish to say no. It's not cruel to remove toxic people from your life. In fact, it's one of the wisest, most courageous things you can do. You have earned the right to peace. You'll have earned the right to say, I matter, my time matters, my heart matters, and I will not waste them on people who don't see that. So if you're watching this and you recognize one of those people in your life, take a deep breath and begin to release. If there's no need for shouting or fighting, simply stop allowing them access to your energy, your kindness, and your personal space.
There is no shame in prioritizing self-respect, only freedom. If this message resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone still burdened by guilt. Someone who believes they owe love to those who abuse it. Let this be the moment they reclaim their life. You have survived everything. Life is thrown your way, you don't need to survive them too. It's time to live your life now, unapologetically.
Hello everybody. So in the past I have told or read stories for children and offered an analysis, and I recently released a new episode of that sort discussing the Grimm's brothers' Snow White, and people seem pretty happy with that. I'll read you a couple of comments. Can we have a whole psychoanalytic series on fairy tales? So many hidden lessons. It also reminds me of the Peterson lectures I listened to on The Lion King, Peter Pan, and Pinocchio. That was some years ago. Yes, more of these. Please do more of these. All the best from the UK. Story time with Dr. Peterson. Too awesome. Well, the episode proved quite popular and people's responses were very positive, and I like doing narrative analysis. And so we're going to try another one today. Hansel and Gretel. And you all know that story, so we'll see how it goes. Hard by a great forest dwelled a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once when great scarcity fell on the land, he could no longer procure daily bread. Now when he thought this over by night in his bed and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, more about her in a moment, what is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves? Now you see, there's something troublesome right there already, because his priorities are backwards. He says, when we no longer have anything even for ourselves. Well, a father with his priorities right would be more concerned about his children's hunger than his own. And so the teller of the tale, the writer, the author of the tale, sets up the situation for us with that foolishness. This woodcutter is selfish and, as we'll see, also weak. And that places his children at great risk. How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves? Prioritizing himself first. I'll tell you what, husband, answered the woman. Early tomorrow morning, we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest. There we will light a fire for them and give each of them 1 piece of bread more, and then we'll go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find their way home again, and we shall be rid of them. No, wife, said the man. I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces. Oh, thou fool, said she. Then we must all 4 die of hunger. Thou mayest as well plane the planks for our coffins. And she left him no peace until he consented. But I feel very sorry for the poor children all the same, said the man. Well, there's quite a tale of domestic catastrophe in that opening paragraph, because his wife, who turns out to be the children's stepmother, as we see in the next paragraph, is quite the horrid piece of work, and he doesn't stand up to her. He proclaims that he feels sorry for his children, but he doesn't throw his wife out of the house, which would be approximately the appropriate move under such circumstances, when her proclivity is to not only ensure that she's fed first, which makes her a very bad mother, but also to trick the children, take them to where it's maximally frightening, the darkest part of the forest, leave them there, and then harass her weak husband to death until he agrees. Now, another thing we might give some thought to with this opening is why the poverty exists, and we could feel sorry for the poor woodcutter and his poor new wife, or we could note very carefully that their poverty might have something to do with their misplaced priorities and their selfishness. So let me give you a counterexample. In the story of Elijah in the Old Testament, Elijah is the first prophet who identifies the voice of conscience with the divine, which is a major psychological transformation, right? Now, Elijah is the enemy of the nature worshippers who are led by an evil queen named Jezebel, who's an arrogant and narcissistic malign foreign influence on the Israelite nation. And she, in her arrogance and haughtiness, brings the nation to ruin, and she persecutes Elijah for his forthrightness and his willingness to stand for the one true God against the nature worshippers, which is something to think about in these most modern of times. In any case, Elijah is running away from Jezebel and her forces after having defeated the worshippers of nature, and God sends him to a poor widow, and who, if I remember correctly, he meets by a well, and she offers to share her remaining food with him. She just has enough flour for one meal for her and her son, and enough flour and oil for one meal for her and her son, but she offers to share it with this stranger, this strange prophet. And then it turns out that if she hits the barrel of flour, more flour appears, and the oil magically refills, so that the prophet and the woman, the widow, the poor widow, and her son subsist on virtually nothing for a very long period of time. And you might ask, well, what does that mean, apart from the, let's say, childish, magical element of it? It means that those who are generous in their attitude, and that might be particularly true of food because human beings share food, are most likely to be provisioned appropriately over the longest period of time. So if you're generous and hospitable, then the probability that you'll stand at the center of a productive and abundant community is radically elevated. Whereas if you're only concerned about yourself and you ensure that you're the one that's fed first, let's say even before your children, then that's reflective of an attitude that's going to do nothing but keep you mired in poverty forever, you and your society. So, strangely enough, paradoxically enough, an attitude of generous hospitality and sharing is the best way to facilitate social interaction in such a way that everything becomes abundant. And the wife of the woodcutter is certainly selfish and cruel, and at minimum the woodcutter himself is a weak pushover. That's very much also reminiscent of the situation with Eve and Adam, because Eve is the primary sinner, let's say, or the initiator of the fall, but Adam is too weak to stand up against her. And, you know, if there's ever a time for a father to make a stand in relationship to his children, it would be at the time when his new wife, who is not the children's biological mother, is harboring selfish and murderous thoughts towards them. So that kind of sums up the domestic situation. The two children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother, there we go, had said to their father. Now, why is that relevant? Well, your risk for being abused in a domestic household, if you're a child, is radically elevated if you have a step-parent. I think the risk for abuse is 100 times greater. It's some ridiculous amount. And so these old stories point out the danger of non-biological relationship in the hothouse of a domestic situation, especially under conditions of scarcity and privation. And that's not particularly politically correct, but raising children is a difficult endeavor, and you need everything that you can possibly have working for you to ensure that you do it properly. And one of the things that is useful to have working for you is biological relationship with the children whose care you're charged with.
Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, supporting everyone from established brands to entrepreneurs just starting. Sign up for your $1.
The people wept bitter tears. The two children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, unfortunate as they are in this poor and selfish household, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress thyself. I will soon find a way to help us." Now, you see, that contrasts Hansel and Gretel with the stepmother and the woodcutter, the father, because the parents look out for themselves. That's their first impulse, even in a murderous way. Whereas Hansel and Gretel make a team, and Hansel's response to Gretel's distress is to say that he will find a way to help the both of them. So he doesn't concern himself with his own immediate survival. He extends a hospitable hand and a brave hand to his sister. And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and put as many of them in the little pocket of his coat as he could possibly get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." So Hansel is emblematic of the boy who can find the shining path even in the darkness. And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the two children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards! We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave each a little piece of bread and said, "There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the stones in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. So he's a thoughtful boy, and he's planning his return home, right? And that's often the end of the story. How do you return home? Like the Hobbit does at the end of the Hobbit and at the end of the Lord of the Rings, right? To wander out into the world and to find your way home transformed. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. His father said, "Hansel, what art thou looking at there and staying behind for? Mind what thou art about. Mind what thou art about, and do not forget how to use thy legs." "Ah, father," said Hansel, "I'm looking at my little white cat, which is sitting up on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me." The wife said, "Fool! That is not thy little cat. That is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys." Hansel, however, had not been looking at the cat, but had been constantly throwing out one of the white pebble stones from his pocket onto the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire, that you may not be cold." So he's couching his malevolence, his cowardly malevolence, in a facade or patina of benevolence. He's out in the forest taking care of his children, and that's a motif that echoes through this story. The contrast between the false facade of parental, paternal, maternal care and the underlying malevolent reality. Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourself down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we have done, we will come back and fetch you away." So the same thing, another sign of persona, another sign of virtue signaling, another sign of false morality, another indication, you might say, of it's a variant of using God's name in vain, the acting out of a claim to moral virtue. Obviously, the woodcutter and his wife are just being good parents, taking care of the children, while pursuing their own narrow, selfish, and even malevolent aims. Very bad. Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread. And as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near, so they'd been lulled into a false sense of security. It was not, which is that's another indication of the depth of the betrayal, right? So the stepmother and the weak father set their children up to assume that they're safe in the darkest place of the woods, but they've skittered off and left them to their own devices. When they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that the father was near. It was not, however, the axe. It was a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree, which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. So that's another indication of his treachery and malevolence in the service of his cruel and heartless stepmother/wife. He's actually set up an additional trick to lull his children into a sense of security so they won't follow and will stay lost in the forest. And as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes shut with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark night. Gretel began to cry and said, "How are we to get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her and said, "Just wait a little until the moon had risen, and then we will soon find the way." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles, which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and showed them the way. They walked the whole night long. So again, you can see that Hansel is taking care of Gretel and making manifest that spirit of reciprocity and mature care that actually saves the children in the final analysis and contrasts them quite dramatically with the appalling conduct of their parents. They walked the whole night long, and by break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, lying immediately, as is her nature. So, and that pertains to what we discussed before, the reasons for her poverty. She's cruel and selfish and prone continually to deceit, and no doubt she believes that the world is a hard place, dooming someone like her to abject poverty such that she can't feed herself, her husband, and the children who aren't her children. But given her character, her socioeconomic circumstances are hardly surprising. "You naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Yeah, well, it might have cut him to the heart, but he didn't do much about it. Not long afterwards, there was once more great scarcity in all parts, and the children heard their mother saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten again. We have 1/2 loaf left, and after that there is an end. Those children must go. We will take them farther into the wood, so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves." Well, so the children have managed to fend for themselves quite adequately at this point, following the silver road back home, in consequence of Hansel's positive conduct, his attentive attitude, and his willingness to take care of his sister. But they are just children, and so it's possible for the adults to circumvent even the wisest actions of children and betray them effectively, which is what happens next. The man's heart was heavy, and he thought, "It would be better for thee to share the last mouthful with thy children." Yeah, you think? The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. And then the author adds a comment. "He who says A must say B likewise, and as he had yielded the first time, he had to do a second time. He had to do so a second time also." Well, his wife pokes and prods him to find his weakness of character, and once having established that initially, she knows the points to leverage, and so does that again. And the authors make reference to the fact that once you've given up in relationship to a fundamental principle the first time, it's much more likely that you'll do the same the second time. The children, however, were still awake and had heard the conversation. When the old folks were asleep, Hansel again got up and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles, as he had done before. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nonetheless, he comforted his little sister and said, "Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly. The good God will help us." So Hansel is also a boy of some upward orientation and faith. And that makes itself manifest in his attitude of reciprocity towards his sister, which, as we said, contrasts with the parents, but also turns out to be the saving grace in the story. Early in the morning came the woman and took the children out of their beds. Their bit of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground. So he's trying a variant of the same strategy that he used last time, to leave a pathway so that when his parents lose him purposefully, he still has the wherewithal to get home. And he's also willing to sacrifice his meal to ensure that the future remains secure and predictable. And that shows a kind of preternatural maturity on his part, because he's a hungry child after all, a starving child even in dire straits, and he still has enough self-control and discipline to sacrifice his bit of bread to ensure that his sister and himself can make their way home. So that's also a testament to Hansel's character.
Getting the most out of life means being prepared for whatever comes your way, but many of us don't cover all your friendly and simple in your Trustpilot. We can.
Hansel, why dost thou?
Trust and Will can help you take control of protecting your family's future. Head over to trustandwill.com/Peterson for 20% off. That's 20% off at trustandwill.com/Peterson.
Hansel, why dost thou stop and look round? Said the father. Go on. I'm looking back at my little pigeon, which is sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me, answered Hansel. Simpleton, said the woman, that is not thy little pigeon. That is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney. Hansel, however, little by little threw all the crumbs on the path. So he's thinking ahead. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Well, this description works on two levels, because there's the concrete level where there is, in the story, the house in the forest, and the forest is the place of danger and the unknown. Danger, possibility, and the unknown. And so that's really the structure of the world. A stable, secure center. That's the house, or in principle secure, although in this case it's inhabited by, evil stepmother. The home surrounded by the unknown. And the children are taken out into the unknown by the acts of their parents, but metaphysically they're abandoned to the unknown because their parents do not provide them with the security that is appropriate from the moral perspective with regard to parental conduct. So children who are the target of malevolent envy and jealousy, even murderous, on the part of their parents, motivated by exceptionally selfish reasons, justified by reference to self-induced poverty, do find themselves abandoned in the unknown. Right? They're parentless children. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was again made. That's another sense of false security. And the mother said, just sit there, you children, and when you are tired, you may sleep a little. She's so wonderful. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are done, we will come and fetch you away. When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who who had scattered his by the way. And so Gretel is also part of a reciprocal and reciprocally altruistic duo. You can imagine a scenario where she had secretly skittered off to eat her lone piece of bread by herself, leaving her brother with nothing. But despite their privation, they prioritize sharing, and that makes them a unit with two minds, let's say. And as such a cooperative unit, they're able to deal with the unknown circumstances that present themselves to them much more effectively. That sharing hospitality is the sacrifice of momentary benefit for the advantage of long-term communion, play, communication, strategy, and mutual support. And that is the foundation of community. Sacrifice as foundation of community. And Hansel and Gretel understand this. Then they fell asleep, and evening came and went, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night. And Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread, which I have strewn about, and they will show us our way home." When the moon came, they set out, but found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. So Hansel is stymied this time in his attempt to circumvent the machinations of his evil stepmother and his weak father. Reference to the limits of his childhood strategizing. Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way." But they did not find it. They walked the whole night, and all the next day too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew on the ground. And as they were so weary that their legs would carry them no longer, they lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. So they've come to the end of their own devices, and they've been abandoned and betrayed by their parents, and so that places them even deeper in the woods, as we find out in the next paragraph. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always got deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they must die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a bough, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when it had finished its song, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted. And so the evil witch, who we'll encounter soon, sends out a attractive and welcoming avatar, familiar, you might say, to attract the children. And so this is the third time in the story where we see the facade of beauty and attractiveness, the white bird and its attractive song, serving as the camouflage that hides something much, much darker and more malevolent. So this whole story is a warning about vice presenting itself as virtue, and the bird is a representation of that. The children are attracted by something that's beautiful and apparently welcoming, and it entices them in their desperation into the evil witch's lair. Now that motif of the positive being used as camouflage for the negative is immediately represented in the form of the house itself. They followed the bird until they reached a little house on the roof of which it alighted. And when they came quite up to the little house, they saw that it was built out of bread and covered with cakes, and that the windows were of clear sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and have a good meal. I'll eat a bit of the roof, and thou, Gretel, can eat some of the window. It will taste sweet." Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leaned against the window and nibbled at the panes. Then a soft voice cried from the room. Okay, so what might we conclude at this point. This looks a little too good to be true. So you have children who are lost in the wilderness in consequence of their parents' maliciousness and weakness and malevolence, and they are as deep into the woods as they possibly can get, which means that they're in real trouble. And a beautiful bird appears and leads them not only to a house, but a house that's literally made out of candy. And so that all screams too good to be true. And it's a warning to everyone, children included, that it's often necessary to look behind the facade, especially in a circumstance where things do seem to be too good to be true. Then a soft voice cried from the room, "Nibble, nibble, gnaw. Who is nibbling at my little house?" The children answered, the wind, the heaven-born wind," and went out eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who thought the roof tasted very nice, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane, sat down and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly the door opened, and a very, very old woman who supported herself on crutches came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes and sugar, apples and nuts. Afterwards, 2 pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them and thought they were in heaven. There's a deep motif here of, as I alluded to earlier, of the pathologies of camouflaged virtue signaling. So children are very dependent, and they're dependent primarily on maternal benevolence. And what that means is that maternal benevolence can be gamed by pathological actors who can accrue to themselves all of the reputational virtue of the positive mother. You can think about this politically as well. The maternal force that cares for everything, and including the planet and everything on it, but in reality is doing nothing but serving its own malicious and carnivorous or even cannibalistic urges. It's a very dark story. And so the worst evil takes the greatest good and perverts it to the worst possible end. And that's what we see happening here. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was in reality a wicked witch who lay in wait for children and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them.
As we celebrate Independence Day this July, we're reminded of the freedoms our founders right friends will have as well. They were most vulnerable among them. That's
said mockingly, "I have them. They will not escape me again." Now, there's another motif here apart from the pathology of glorious maternal compassionate virtue signaling masking carnivorous or cannibalistic urges, and that is the danger of maternal hyper-solicitude, right? So human beings have the longest developmental period of any creature, and it can last almost 2 decades, let's say. And what that means is that a force that powerful can easily go wrong. A mother shouldn't be so kind. She should take care of her children, but not offer them too much being a convenient house in the midst of danger, but not only a house literally made out of candy and cake. The mother who offers her children too much, who does everything for them, who goes above and beyond the call of duty to announce to the world her virtuous compassion as the highest possible moral virtue is also the hovering helicopter mother who ends up devouring her own children. So, if it looks and sounds too good to be true, there's some real possibility that it is. I remember my mother told me once, she died very recently last year. She's a very agreeable person and a passionate person, but she had a spine and she didn't overindulge her children or overprotect them. And I left home when I was about 16. I'd been having some friction with my father, which was some him and some me, perhaps even mostly me. And then once I left and went to college, our relationship renormalized and maintained itself quite positively from that time forward. My mom said to me, after I had returned from college, when we were talking about having left and the fact that things had settled up, she said, and the conflict that accompanied my leaving, she said, if it was too good at home, you'd never leave. And I thought that was my mother in a nutshell, because she was a very pleasant person and a very caring person and hospitable, but she had enough sense to know that a little bit of pushing her children out of the nest was actually a very positive thing. And this evil witch is all too good and announcing that continually. Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty with their plump red cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into a little stable, and shut him in behind a grated door. He might scream as he liked, that was of no use. And she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke, and cried, "Get up, lazy thing, fetch some water, and cook something good for thy brother. He's in the stable outside and is to be made fat." And so that's an interesting twist in the story too, because mothers obviously feed their children, and that's part of maternal behavior, but to overfeed a child is again to make a pathology of care, right? To make a show of that maternal solicitude at the cost of the child's health and well-being. And so that's the meaning of the motif, that she's fattening up her ersatz son, her temporary son, for no other reason than to devour him. He is in the stable outside and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him. Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain. She was forced to do what the wicked witch ordered her. And now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out thy finger that I may feel if thou wilt soon be fat." Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see it and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished that there was no way of fattening him. Well, that's another indication of Hansel's self-sufficiency. He's attentive enough and intelligent enough to notice what the old woman is up to, quite clearly not to deceive himself about her intent, and in consequence of that careful attentiveness and refusal to deceive himself, he plays a trick on her and indicates to her that he is by no means optimally positioned to serve as a meal. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel still continued thin, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer. "Hola, Gretel," she cried to the girl. "Be active and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean, tomorrow I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down over her cheeks. Again, an indication that she really loved her brother. A contrary attitude might be that she was quite relieved that it was Hansel who was serving as main course rather than her. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forests had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together." That's hammering home that motif of union in the face of adversity. Just keep thy noise to thyself, said the old woman. All that won't help thee at all. Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire. We will bake first, said the old woman. I've already heated the oven and kneaded the dough. She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were already darting. Creep in, said the witch. See if it is properly heated, so that we can shut the bread in. And when once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in there. Then she would eat her too. But Gretel, also being an awake child, properly taken care of, let's say, by her brother, unwilling to deceive herself about the motivation of the woman who's just too good to be true, Gretel saw what she had in her mind and said, I do not know how I am to do it. How do you get in? Silly goose, said the old woman. The door is big enough. Look, I can get in myself. And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel, who's an enterprising young woman, gave her a push that drove her far into it and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh, then she began to howl quite horribly, but Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burned to death. So Hansel and Gretel are awake enough to defend themselves against the evil machinations of the camouflaged witch, the witch camouflaged in virtue. And, you know, one of the things Carl Jung said about pathological families was that children are also often offered an easy way out by an over-solicitous parent, for example, but that they don't necessarily have to take the bait. So you could imagine a lonely mother with a child who has, maybe a cold, and the mother that his or her state of physical health is sufficiently compromised so that staying home from school might be justifiable, and the child knows full well that he's not particularly sick, but takes the bait and then enters into a pathological covenant with the mother such that he exaggerates his proclivity for illness and brings illness onto himself in so doing, and she benefits from the fact that she can make her maternal solicitude manifest publicly, benefit from that display of virtue, and also not have to be alone. And so Hansel and Gretel are not playing games of that sort. They're maybe because they're bonded together and taking care of each other, maybe because they're oriented properly, they're capable of fending for themselves and taking action when necessary and not falling prey to the machinations of the over demonstrative mother figure who in truth wants to devour them. Children have a moral responsibility too, and that's a tricky thing to manage, but it takes two to tango. And that doesn't mean I'm blaming the child in situations where the family becomes pathological. No, I had people in my clinical practice who were offered pathological invitations, let's say, by their parents, and they resisted instead of falling prey to them and managed to free themselves from the situation. And so, everybody has their destiny, and that includes children. And we make our beds even when we're very young and then are required to lie in them.
You know what happens every summer? We all get a little too comfortable with letting our routine slide. We sleep in, we take vacation. Author Timothy Gallup. Now you can try Hallow completely free for 3 months when you go to hallow.com/Jordan. That's HALLOW.com/Jordan for 3 months free.
Gretel ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable and cried, Hansel, we're saved, the old witch is dead. So immediately her first response is to go rescue her brother. Then Hansel sprang out like a bird from its cage when the door is opened for it. How they did rejoice and embrace each other and dance about and kiss each other. And as they no longer had any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house. And that that is indication of some real bravery on their part as well, and some curiosity, because you could easily imagine that their first impulse would be to get the hell away from that place as rapidly as possible. But they're courageous enough to investigate, and what they find is in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels. These are far better than pebbles, said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever could be got in. And Gretel said, I too will take something home with me, and filled her pinafore full. But now we will go away, said Hansel, that we may get out of the witch's forest. So why did the children find a great treasure in the witch's house? Well, they found a great treasure in the defeated witch's house, right? That's a crucial distinction. And the greatest treasure that children can find is the means of assuring their own mature independence. You remember now, Hansel found pebbles that would help him, used pebbles that would help him find his way home, and he makes an allusion here to the fact that these pearls are better than the pebbles that he had. And that's an indication that, like, it's an echoing or a parallelism, indicating that the treasure that they have now found is the treasure that always helps everyone adventure and return home. Well, that's a genuine maturity, and it's a maturity that an independence that the children found in being forthright, in maintaining their union in love, and in defeating the over-solicitous maternal embrace. When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great piece of water. We cannot get over, said Hansel. I see no footplank and no bridge, and no boat crosses either, answered Gretel. But a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over. Then she cried, little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or a bridge in sight. Take us across on the back, so white. Well, it's a magical transition back to the familiarity of household and father, and the water serves as that bridge, and the duck as the magical means of transport from the ultimately unknown, where the evil force of maternal devouring lies in wait. It's a transition point back to the normal world. And then there's an echo here again of the thoughtfulness of the children, because the duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on its back and told his sister to sit by him. No, replied Gretel, that will be too heavy for the little duck. She shall take us across one after the other. So, even under those circumstances, the children are looking out for each other. Hansel invites Gretel to sit by him, but they're also paying attention to the circumstances even in the midst of their good fortune, so that they don't take undue advantage of what's being offered to them. And so they're patient, they allow the bird to transport them one at a time, and that also ensures their safety. So they're actually very wise little children, and things work out reasonably well for them. Good little duck did so, and when they were once safely across and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves into their father's arms. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. Well, I should hope not. The woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them. Then all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. My tale is done. There runs a mouse. Whoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. Hard to tell what that ending means. So, well, the children have an adventure. It's an initiation. They go into the depths of the forest in consequence of a profound betrayal. They encounter one of the darkest extant spirits, that devouring force of maternal over-solicitude. They keep their wits about them. They see through the facade They defeat the evil witch. They maintain their partnership. They capture the treasure of great price in consequence of their maturity, bravery, and attentiveness, and they make their way home. And that's the end of Hansel and Gretel.
Nice.
Are you looking to
Really
establish
nice.
your business using an address other than your home? Well, at iPol...
You don't win an argument with your wife. You never win that. Part of your defensive mechanism and your pride is going to be, well, this time for sure.
Sometimes, though.
Yeah, well, it's convenient when that's the case.
What's some advice that you could give a man my age on how best to integrate, or maybe conquer, the ghosts of past relationships?
The core of the question was, what can I do to ensure that I'm not dragging the past into the future? Understand the past. Understand the past. There will be times when you or your partner were betrayed in the past, by yourself, by someone else, doesn't matter. There's a betrayal. And then when I suggest that it's you, you're going to get defensive. Partly because you don't want it to be you, and partly because there's a part of you that knows that there's something underneath that that's going to be very unpleasant to uncover. You also have to allow your partner to do a good thing badly. When they first start to listen, when they first start to help and untangle, you got to let them flail about a fair bit. People will often do something difficult twice. Go on a date, for example, when they haven't been with each other for a long time. It won't go well, and they'll think, well, we're certainly not doing that again. That happens to people. Then they don't have any romance for decades. That is not wise. That's not wise.
In this episode, we're talking about marriage and relationships. So that should be interesting. Fortunately, my husband doesn't watch anything I do. So, first on the line, John in Chicago.
Hi, John.
Hi, Dr. Peterson. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for offering.
I'm 53 years old. I've been divorced for about 9 years. During those 9 years, I've purposely devoted a very substantial portion of my time, effort, and attention to my son and his predisposition for acting. Recently, at the urging of my highly extroverted 17-year-old son, and after quite a bit of thought and feelings of terror on my part, I took his advice and started dating. Thankfully, after taking that step, I've started dating a rather fantastic woman. During the adventure of our 5-month relationship, I've seriously discovered the importance of having an intimate partner in my life, and we've even discussed the possibility of spending the rest of our lives together. So my question is, based on the abbreviated description of my situation, what's some advice that you could give a man my age on how best to integrate, or maybe conquer, the ghosts of past relationships and life choices to properly set the foundation for a new relationship to last the rest of our lives?
I have a program that you might want to try online called Past Authoring that helps people write an autobiography. I would say that it would be useful for you, since you're concerned with conquering the ghosts of the past, which is a very wise thing to do at your age, with your wisdom, and when you're wanting to embark on a new path forward with clarity and with the demons of the past understood and relatively conquered. Now, we organize ourselves neurologically at the highest level through language and story. And your life to date, properly understood, would make a coherent narrative. Now, that's hard because you have 5 decades to contend with, and there will be elements of your past that aren't well mapped. And those are the pitfalls. Everything you don't understand about your past is a pitfall waiting for you to fall into in the future. Now, one of the ways that you can understand where those pitfalls exist is that you'll have memories of the past that are still hot and active. They still have emotional significance. Now, if a memory that's more than a year and a half old still has emotional significance, that's an indication from the anxiety alarm systems that you did not mine that experience for its full significance. And that means that you still have something to learn to avoid falling into that pitfall again in the future, which is what you indicated that you want to do. So I would say that you could profitably spend some time writing down your life. Now, the way the program works, and you don't have to do the program, you can do this on your own, is that it asks you to break your life down into 7 or 8 epochs. So sometimes people do that by their relationships. Sometimes people do it by their educational progression or their career transformations. Whatever way seems reasonable to you, or different chunks of age, whatever way seems reasonable to you to break down your life is fine. And then to think through what the most significant positive and negative events were, to lay them out in a way that helps you understand why the positive events were positive, what you did right, and what the circumstances were so that that positive outcome was most likely, where you went astray, how you contributed to that, how you might deal with that in the future. You want to do that in a manner that brings you up to date. And so that'll help exercise, and I don't mean physical exercise, I mean demon exercise. That'll help exercise the ghosts of the past. Now, the rule here to understand is, the principle to understand here is the actual principle of memory. You do not remember the past, so you have an accurate, objective record of the past. That's actually impossible, because you can't have a comprehensive record of the past. You remember the past so that you can duplicate what was good about it in the future and avoid what was bad about it in the future. And that means you have to have derived the appropriate moral, which is the point, from the outcome. And so it's very useful to bring your narrative up to date. Then you know where you are. Once you know where you are, you can plot your future. You can plot your future together with your new partner. And so the reason I recommended this in particular, in consequence of this question, was because the core of the question was, what can I do to ensure that I'm not dragging the past into the future? It's like, understand the past, right? Delve into it.
That's good. This is interesting because you get deep into it, and I've got some practical tips, because not just actually, because it's been a number of years that I've been remarried, but I went through something similar. What I noticed, try and figure out what your concerns are, and, for lack of a better word, your triggers are. So I noticed that when I was in certain situations that were bad in the past, that had a similar pattern, I'd have an emotional reaction that was way off the charts. And I had to recognize, I'm recognizing a pattern from the past, but this isn't the same thing. It just has certain similarities. Right. So that's a me problem. But then I talk about it with my husband, and he started to pick up on it once we noticed this happen a couple of times. And I'd say, okay, this is freaking me out because of what happened in the past. And then we'd communicate through it, which was really useful.
Okay, so one of the things that you're pointing out is that, and this is extremely useful, is that you can watch yourself or your partner for emotional responses that are disproportionate to the trigger that recur. Okay, now to investigate those, you have to take a trip to Dante's Inferno. Okay, so the book, The Inferno, is a story of a voyage to the underworld, a voyage to hell. Now, here's the idea, is that so imagine there's a trivial trigger for a relatively profound emotional upset. Okay, that means there's something underneath it. Okay, how far underneath? Well, that's what you have to dig into to find out. Dante put the betrayers right next to Satan in the depths of hell, so to speak. So often what you'll find with yourself or with your partner, and this is almost inevitable in any relationship, is that there will be times when you or your partner were betrayed in the past by yourself, by someone else, doesn't matter. There's a betrayal, and that has left you unable to trust and hypersensitive about any situation that's reminiscent of that.
Yeah,
and some
exactly,
people,
yeah.
some people are just some people who've been betrayed continually, who've never had a good relationship. Let's say if they're a woman with a man, they're just like that. They just have like 100 triggers like that.
Yeah, no wonder.
And no wonder. But it means, unfortunately, that you have to go to the bottom. And that's very difficult because one of the things you'll find, too, is that, so let's say I identify that in you. Well, first of all, you're going to see me as the cause.
Oh, yeah.
So that's hard. And then when I suggest that it's you, you're going to get defensive. Partly because you don't want it to be you, and partly because there's a part of you that knows that there's something underneath that that's going to be very unpleasant to uncover. And then you're going to be irritable and get angry as a defensive mechanism, and then if I keep pushing, you'll cry and make me feel like I'm a bully. But so this has to be done very carefully.
It might also be an emotional release, though, crying.
It is an emotional release.
From my experience,
yeah.
And this didn't take me very long because I'd already done a lot of work and was aware that this was going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So when I saw myself, okay, my heartbeat is going up, something happens that reminds me of a past situation. My heartbeat goes up and I get flappy, like really flappy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing this. Absolutely no.
Yeah.
Huge boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, where did this outburst of emotion come from? And then I could go, okay, I'm scared. That's the main thing, is I'm scared, and that's not an appropriate response. I feel like what worked for me was like taking a minute and breathing and calming down and being like, this isn't the same. Trying to retrain your nervous system or something, this isn't the same.
Or even, this might not be the same, right? That's a good initial step.
Yes. That's a good initial step.
Might not be the same, right? And then there's other attitudes that you can adopt that are helpful. Like if you're running into a recurrent problem with your partner, there's a couple of possibilities. It's you, that's one possibility. It's the other person, that's another possibility. It's some situational variable that you haven't all considered. Now, the attitude you have to take, and this is hard to do, this is the attitude of humility rather than pride, is even if it's only 5% me, it would be in my best interest and my partner's best interest and the best interest of our marriage to fix it. So I'm going to listen to what this other person says. You know, part of your defensive mechanism and your pride is going to be, well, this time for sure it's my partner. The probability that's 100% them is very low. And
sometimes, though,
it's
skedaddle.
Yeah, well, it's convenient when that's the case. The reason that humility is a religious practice is because it's extremely useful to adopt the attitude that you might have something to learn, right? Because then you can keep learning. And the goal, the mutual goal should be, and this is why the marriage vow has to be sacred, it has to be deep. The aim should be, let's live in peace and harmony. Let's solve this.
Not let's win.
Yeah, that's true.
Or I want to win.
Yeah.
More than let's win.
Or something terrible in me wants to win. You don't win an argument with your wife. You never win that. It's not. And if you win repeatedly, she just loses repeatedly. That's a very bad strategy. The goal should be, we'll talk about this badly, foolishly, but as the best we can until we've sorted out. And that's, the more the person you're with or you has been hurt, the harder that is. It's hard, and it often takes, especially someone who is not practiced at this, they'll be upset about something. It can take them a week to figure out what's actually bothering. It's very hard to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, you need to practice. But practice does work.
Practice definitely works. Yeah. And getting your aim straight works. It's like, I don't want to have this fight with you for the rest of time.
Well, remembering you like the person. If you like the person, that really helps. It's like, wait, no, I do like you.
It's a very good thing to remember, because that also helps you fight against the proclivity to win. It's like, you You got to remember that you love the person. This is something you can really practice in your marriage. Like as a practice, look at your wife and remember when that you love her. Remember that. Bring it to mind. Bring that feeling that you had when that was self-evident. People, often romanticize the early stages of a relationship when that intense romantic love first manifests itself. And everyone says, well, that declines with time. Well, it declines with time if you don't practice it. Just like everything else. It doesn't decline with time if you practice it. And our culture is very clueless about such things. We know virtually nothing of spiritual practice. We don't practice humility. Right? You have to practice that. We don't practice gratitude. To practice gratitude means you remember what you're grateful about and search for it genuinely every day or every moment. And you do the same thing with love. You have to remember. And that can really help you when you're trying to sort through something complex. And then you also have to have the trust that's courage rather than the trust that's naivety. Right? It's like, I'm going to put me in your hands when I'm most vulnerable. Right, so you don't want to violate that trust.
Yeah.
And if you do violate it, then you want to sort that out, apologize, and try not to do it again. The other thing I would say, just to close this off, is you also have to allow your partner to do a good thing badly. Like when they first start to listen, when they first start to help and untangle, you got to let them flail about a fair bit. And you have to remember, since you're married, that it might take them 50 times to get it right. Just like it might take 50 dates or 50 meetings before you're even vaguely good at it. 50 negotiation sessions. So 50 isn't very many if you're going to have to do something 10,000 times in your life. And people will often do something difficult twice. Go on a date, for example, and they haven't been with each other for a long time. It won't go well, and they think, well, we're certainly not doing that again. It's like, oh, really? You're not going to do that again ever? And then that happens to people. Then they don't have any romance for decades. That is not wise. That's not wise.
Are you tired of spending countless hours and dollars on health and beauty products? 1 in 3 people who sells age are fits within 60 health and wellness.
Okay, my name is Tahani, as you know, and I'm a stay-at-home mom to our 7-month-old son. And my husband, Michael, is the sole provider for our family. My husband's very hardworking and also eager to be involved in the home. But sometimes neither one of us knows what that involvement should look like from him. So first of all, how many hours a day are ideal for him to be home with the family, since he makes his own hours? And is it essential to take consistent days off each week, or should he just work and earn as much as possible? More importantly, when he is home, should it be diaper changes, bottles, and bath time, like being a Mr. Mom, or should he focus on playtime only? Basically, how can someone who works a lot make the greatest impact as a father, and what can I do as a wife to encourage him and support that involvement from my husband?
So, for the first 9 months, in my estimation, the primary role of father is to support the mother in her intense care of the infant and to spell her off. And so he should be focusing on the two of you, and how much he should do that is dependent to some degree on how much you need. And because his goal should be to make sure that you aren't overtired and pushed beyond your capacity. Now, whether or not, how much he should work and make money, that's something you guys have to negotiate, and you will have to negotiate that with your own level of exhaustion and need. Now, having said that, I would also say that those first 9 months when the baby is really a dependent infant are also a time where the father can begin to establish a relationship with the child. And any of that care that you described that's practical, feeding, changing, etc., is a way of doing that. But holding the baby and starting to play, like even with a very young baby, say 6 months, 5 months, a father can start to play games. So one game you can play with a very young infant is to hold the infant up and to make eye contact, which infants quite enjoy, and you can make a little sequence of noises, like a little melody or count. 1, 2, 3, tap heads. 1, 2, 3, tap heads. 1, 2, 3, tap heads. 1, 2, 3, then don't. That's a little surprise, because a game is often, especially with an infant, a game is the establishment of a predictable routine with a surprise variant. And you'll see babies will laugh about that. Now, if the surprise is too great, they'll cry, so you got to kind of calibrate that. But that's a very simple game, and men are particularly good at playing with young children. And when men are playing, what they tend to do is to push the baby outside of his or her zone of simple comfort into the zone of intense play, into being thrilled often. And they do that by pushing the baby in various ways beyond his or her ordinary physical limits, stretching, lifting up, lifting down, flipping, and all of that is a way to help the baby explore the limits of his or her own physical being, the distinction between pain and pleasure, and to develop trust. Like, the most important thing that your husband can do, apart from supporting you and making sure you're not burned out and unable to enjoy and be fully engaged in what you're doing, is to play with the infant. Now, that play involves the sorts of things I described, but also the physical contact and physical touch is extremely important to infants. And so the goal of your husband is to push the baby continually to his or her physical limits in a manner that both find enjoyable and it's enjoyable because there's an element of fun and surprise to it, but there's also an enjoyment in the mutual understanding that develops and the bond that exists because of the trust. Another way of analogizing it, I would say, is your husband is going to dance with the baby. One of the things you see with kids that aren't attended to enough physically, especially as they get to be around 3, is that they're vague in their attention, and they're uncoordinated and ungraceful in their movements. The Taoists would regard that as the state of being an uncarved block. And what you see in children like that is they haven't been attended to enough. They haven't been sharpened up, and men who are attending to their children intensely sharpen them up. They keep them on their toes. They play little tricks on them. They make sure they're awake, and they push them to their limit, and they do that in a manner that's confident and playful, and that makes the child understand his or her embodiment much more deeply, and also establishes an immense love of play and a solid basis for trust and adventure. And that's a man's role. So now women can...
What about... Yeah. So I had this conversation with Mom actually a bit ago, because I work from home, and I have for 7 or 8 years, and my husband works from home, and so it's complicated to know who does what. What I figured out was helpful, just more practically, so you can tell me what you think about this, was diaper changes. I feel like you weren't a fan of diaper changes.
No, I didn't mind once I learned how to do it.
Really helpful, especially if you're breastfeeding, because then you're already kind of on call all the time and attached to the baby. Diaper changes are really helpful. It doesn't take very long, but those were really helpful. And then she asked about how much per day, which is hard to say too, but you mentioned enough so that you're not resentful, basically, and that you're still enjoying the baby.
Yes.
And we figured that was at least a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening. That's minimum. And then I think it's tricky when people work from home, because it's kind of like, oh, you're in the other room, what are you doing? I'm starting to get tired, maybe I'm a bit annoyed. And taking 5-minute breaks to come say hi is really beneficial too. So I think this is just for the mom.
Explain that too.
Well, you get, especially with little babies, you get overwhelmed, especially if you're sleep deprived just the first 3 months, particularly with your first. But after, say the baby's fussy, you haven't slept, the baby's not sleeping well, you're trying to breastfeed, you're not sure if they're hungry, you're just not sure really what's going on. You're like, I can't hold a crying baby.
Anymore.
Yeah. I can't do it. That's
really
the point when you're like, can you take the baby for 5 minutes? I need to breathe.
You have to watch. The role of the husband in the first 9 to 9 months is really to keep a really sharp eye on the mother and make sure that food helps too, yes, and make sure that she isn't pushed beyond her limits. And that's problematic because she's constantly on call and her sleep is disrupted. So you have to keep an eye on that. And if she gets teary or upset or irritable, and those things will all happen, she has to be spelled off.
So, that's what you meant by spelled off. I have no idea what that means. I think it's also the role of the wife or the mother to communicate with the husband so that when they're at their limit, they go, I need help right now. Instead of sitting there and freaking out. And you're not being needy because the first period of time is really crazy, especially if you're by yourself and you don't have help, kind of. So it's okay to be like, I'm at my limit right now. I need a breather. And a 5-minute breather is actually pretty decent. It's when there's no...
Yeah, well, that's for on the mother's side. Like, she has to guard herself against the guilt that says I should be 100% thrilled to be with my baby all the time. And it's like, no, 90% of the time will do, or 80%, or 75%. Right?
That's still a lot.
It's still a lot, And she, when you're taking care of someone, this goes for the elderly or for people who are ill too, while you're taking care of them, especially if it's a long-term arrangement, you have to ensure that you're taking care of yourself, because you won't be able to do it effectively in the long run if you're pushed beyond your actual capacity. And that's where you start to do things like consider your resentment as well. If you notice that you're irritable and resentful, you want to determine and talk to your partner about whether or not you're just being irresponsible and immature, because there's a lot of maturation that has to happen when you're a new parent, or whether you're demanding too much of yourself, right? That's also a kind of delusion. Eric Neumann, who was Carl Jung's most accomplished student by a lot, said that you shouldn't try to be better than you are. And what he meant by that was not don't improve, because you should improve, but don't fool yourself into thinking that you're a better person than you actually are, not least because some of that irritation you might feel at being on call constantly is actually a manifestation of a necessary self-protective mechanism. Right.
Agreed.
Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, supporting everyone from established brands to entrepreneurs just